Whoa, that was loud. Welcome to the work session for the Salt Lake City Council, February 18th. Our meetings are public. Thank you. Our meetings are public, and you're welcome to join us in person or by watching from the council agenda page, also through Zoom, YouTube, or SLC TV. We hope that you will continue to join us in whichever manner you feel most comfortable. This is a work session meeting during which there is no public comment. Please join us tonight during our 7 p.m. formal meeting to share your comments. We, of course, welcome your feedback anytime. You can mail to us at P.O. Box 145476, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114. You can also send us an email at council.comments@slc.gov, or you can use our 24-hour phone comment line. The number is 801-535-7654. Comments we receive on agenda topics are shared with council members and posted in our website, slccouncil.com. The first item in our agenda is the informational winter shelter plans update. Andrew Johnston, sharing the table, Director of Homeless Policy and Outreach. Welcome.
Thank you, council members. It's a short one today. I know last week we went pretty long. I can follow up on questions if you'd like at this, but I have one slide today. You can see we're still at capacity at the homeless resource centers, as well as the winter overflow sites. Good news is that it's at capacity because people are using them. Bad news is we still need more beds, obviously. Encampment impact mitigation has been a little slow the last few weeks. Code Blue has been a part of that. Some of the weather-related issues have slowed that down a bit. We'll see a lot more work this week potentially on the Jordan River, particularly on the south end of that trail. And then rapid intervention will be a lot on the Jordan River west side, but also there are a few, I think, ballpark locations that could be hit as well, depending on how time goes this week. So a lot of work going on. And then the homeless engagement and response team, HEART, they are doing a lot of public outreach. I believe today, I think literally at the airport working with that group, and then other groups as well in the community to give them information and help people gain their knowledge about homelessness and what's going on, what we're trying to do as a city, and how we can respond to their needs more effectively. That is the extent of the follow-up. We've talked about Code Blue the last few weeks, still have that same sign-up link if that comes forward. I think there may be one night this week that's potential, but I'm not sure. And then it seems to warm up a little bit next week. So we'll see how Code Blue goes the next little while, but they still need volunteers.
Council members, any questions? Any comments, thoughts? Okay. Thank you, Andrew. I have just one quick thought. I know that there is with the session upon us. I know that you, the administration, and many of our colleagues here on the council are working very hard to ensure that we're all on the same page and that we can continue to work together with the state on what is bigger than us, or an issue that is bigger than Salt Lake City alone. I'm curious about about the work that we do, because I know and I've seen it in my neighborhood. The many departments that come in and help those that are neighbors that are unsheltered. But I wonder if there's an opportunity for us during some of these updates to share some data. How many interactions from the encampment mitigation team have done in the last, how many weeks or months, and how many interactions the rapid intervention team had. I think it might illustrate the point of how much work, we're doing in the city. We know, and many of our neighbors know, but I think that this might be an opportunity to share those numbers, because those numbers are ultimately people that we are trying to help in our streets. So I wonder if there is an opportunity to share some of that data in the future. Not to create a lot of work from your side. I know that you do a lot. Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, we do track all those numbers for the rapid intervention team, work with the county on the encampment impact mitigation work as well. So we can pull numbers as well and share that with the council if that'd be helpful.
That would be very useful to me, at least. Thank you. Thank you. Moving on to item number 2, is another informational topic, and it's R1 single-family residential districts proposed zoning text amendment. Joining at the table, Brian Fulmer, council policy analyst, Nick Norris, planning director, Andy Holka, principal planner, and Becky maybe not, principal planner, but maybe I'm missing someone else, so please introduce yourself if I miss someone. Brian, it's your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I turn it over to the planning folks, I just want to point out that you have a list of straw polls at your spaces there at the dais, that it would be helpful for staff if you could go through those and give a little direction on what your thoughts are on those. And with that, turn it over to planning.
All right, before we jump into the presentation, this is a follow-up briefing that we provided to the council at your request for an R1 study. That briefing we held last fall, and you asked us to come back with a recommendation on something. So the team's been looking at that based on not just our own code and research, but also on some precedents from other cities. Some of you may have, if you remember back to that briefing, we used a city in North Carolina that had demonstrated a small lot provision that produced significantly lower cost housing. And then last week, the city of Portland, Oregon, released a study. We're happy to provide that if you haven't seen it, of efforts they made, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago now. And the results of that on housing costs, and they mirror each other. So these recommendations are really based on how do we lower housing costs in our existing neighborhoods, particularly in areas of high access to high opportunity, and what we can do to help improve our overall housing situation. So I'm going to turn the time over to Ben and Andy, who are part of the team that did all the research, and they will walk through a short, I think we have 10-slide presentation, so we can then get to the straw polls. So it might be best if you have questions to let us get through the 10 slides, and then we can go from there. Works. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Nick. So, yeah, today we're here to talk about single-family zoning reform. Next slide, please. As Nick explained, we're here because last year staff put together this study, Potential Approaches to Simplifying and Improving R1 Districts. The council recently had some time to talk about that and basically told staff to put together a recommendation based on what was in that study. So that's what we're here to talk about today. We're introducing our recommendation that has 3 big ideas. The first is to make amendments to the single-family zoning code. Second is to reduce flag lot restrictions. And then the third is to add new housing options. Next slide, please. So the first big idea, as I mentioned, amendments to the single-family zoning code. A little context, in the study, some of the options that had initially been considered were to potentially rezone all of the R1 properties to maybe R1 5000 or to a different code with different standards. Our recommendation today is to avoid rezoning the properties, just leave the R1 zones as they are on the map, but to take the 3 separate sections of code and consolidate those all into one chapter. You could put all of the standards in a nice chart like the one on the screen, and then also make some updates to those standards as we do the consolidation. Some of the standards that we are recommending changing are removing the averaging requirements that are in the R1 zones and making some changes to height and setbacks. Next slide, please.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a question on that previous slide? Sorry to interrupt your flow. It's talking about the maximum lot size, but is there a minimum? Is it contemplated that we would change the minimum or keep the minimums as they are?
So the maximum lot size is existing, and we haven't proposed any changes there. And under this, the minimums would stay the same for standard single-family development. Now, we are going to later go through other options that will have their own separate rules.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Next slide then. Some of the proposed changes in the R1 zones for a standard single-family development are to remove the front setback averaging. So very quickly, the current code requires if you're going to build a new single-family home, in order to determine the front setback, you have to measure the setbacks of all the neighbors on the block face, average that number, and then that's your setback. That's complex to explain. It's difficult. It adds extra work and cost for property owners who look to develop. So we're recommending removal of that standard, establishing just a set front yard setback and not requiring the average. Next slide. Another requirement that has an averaging is building height. So currently, the requirement for a pitched roof building, the maximum height is 28 feet, or the average height on the block face. So similar to the front yard averaging, that's difficult to get all those measurements and ensure that they're accurate. And so our one recommendation is to remove the averaging and just set a maximum height. We also have requirements for exterior wall height, which we are recommending removing because we feel that a maximum building height alone is sufficient to regulate height in these areas. So the recommendations for height would be to eliminate the averaging, increase the height for pitched roof from 28 to 30 feet, and increase for flat roofs from 20 to 24 feet. Next slide, please. The next big idea is reducing flag lot restrictions. Flag lots, for those who don't know, are lots built behind an existing lot. It's currently quite difficult to get these approved under our current standards, and we wanted to remove the restrictions to make these easier to develop. Right now, these are a conditional use, which means that in order to build a flag lot, you need to have the Planning Commission approval. And there are also larger minimum lot sizes and minimum widths and other standards for the access to reach the flag lot. So our recommendation is to make these a permitted use, so they wouldn't need Planning Commission approval, and then to reduce the lot size and the access width requirements to make these easier to develop. Next slide, please.
Great. So the next third idea is expanding housing options. This would create a option called small lot dwellings. This would be allowed in all the R1, R2, and SR zones, all three of those SR zones. Small lot dwellings are intended to be what you would think of as starter homes or aging in place homes. On the smaller size, they would be regulated by footprint and interior space. It would not replace the zoning of those three districts, but it would offer a new development option for property owners in those districts. Next slide, please. Like I just mentioned, it would allow additional building types. We are proposing to allow duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and townhomes, but we would cap the units at 4 total. Next slide, please. Expanding housing options does have some quite different standards than the standard R1 standards. Notably, it reduces the minimum lot size down to 2,000 square feet per unit. It regulates the maximum footprint at 800 square feet. The footprint is just the exterior measurement. And then it also regulates the gross square footage, which is the interior measurement of floor space to 1,200 square feet per unit. It does not require frontage on a public street, and it does also reduce setback requirements. And it also increases the maximum lot coverage percentage allowed. I believe that is proposed to be at 60, and most of our R1 zones right now are at 40. Next slide, please. Durham, North Carolina, as Nick mentioned earlier when he introduced this, has shown that this is a very effective way at producing affordable housing. In 2023, Durham reported that the median sales price of a 1,200 square foot small home was $348,000. That same report stated that a standard single-family home was $605,000. The photos on the left and in the middle show homes that are currently for sale, and then the homes on the right are homes that have recently sold in Durham that utilize their small lot program that sold for less than $370,000 each. Next slide, please. Towards the end of 2024, we received a private application called Starter Homes SLC. The intention behind that petition is similar to what ours is here, but there are quite a few differences. Expanding housing options, what we are calling our program or proposal. It covers more districts, it allows additional housing types, and it regulates footprints and gross square footage amounts, which we believe are paramount to promoting affordability. Next slide, please.
Okay, so those are the big ideas. The input that we're hoping to get today and the discussion that we hope that you have are to touch on the approach, first of all, of putting a cap on the size of these new units, these starter home, starter size units. Do you agree with that approach? Is that important to you? And then if so, if new options for those smaller units become available, what densities and building types would you be comfortable with? Staff is recommending allowing up to 4 units per lot plus bonuses for building preservation and affordable housing. Are you comfortable with that? And the building types. Staff is recommending allowing missing middle building types in single family zones if they are limited to those smaller square footage sizes to be in that more affordable size range. So that's really all we have for you. We want to just open it up to you for questions and discussion.
Go ahead, Councilmember Dugan.
All right, thank you. And we'll just start with the small units. I'm open to the idea. I think the smaller lots and the vision behind that is commendable, and I like that thought process. A couple just questions on, and in order that I just wrote them down. So one would just be the off-street parking requirements for those individual units. The question is also on if you were to say we would agree with cottage home types, the setback, because the cottage home's backyard would be the side yard, and the backyard of the lot would be the side yard of the 2 of the cottage homes, or one of the cottage homes, however they can fit in that. And then the minimum is 2,000 square foot lot size, and if it's just a particular block. So in a 5,000, you could have 2 to 3, depending on the 5,000, R1 5,000, but maximum of 4, and I think I'm good with that as the 800 foot. Now the other question is, how does this differ, and how does this compete against the affordable housing? And I know in your administrator's transmission, you kind of touched on that. One has a little bit larger size. The affordable housing has a larger size than the small. But could you kind of, for the rest of us, just kind of explain the differences and how those would compete, and if would one be overriding the other ones, and we basically would not have the affordable housing? So how does that balance out?
Sure. So for the first one, the off-street parking is 1 per unit. The cottage, we have not gotten so deep into the form of the development.
Okay.
With the affordable housing incentives, you kind of hit the nail on the head that with the affordable housing incentives, you are not regulated by size. You could go as big as you could fit, basically, based off of those standards. And there are those affordability requirements. With this proposal, you are limited to 800 square foot footprint and 1,200 square foot of interior space.
And so the parking is not considered part of that 800-foot footprint. That is just for the dwelling.
Correct. The building of the dwelling is limited to 800 square feet per unit. The parking is just on the lot.
Okay. Okay. That's all for that. Questions now.
Councilmember Mono.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair. I think that, well, can I ask a clarifying question first? So if I have a 7,000 square foot lot, let's say, okay, let's use a 12,000 square foot lot. And does that mean I can build 6 dwellings, or I'm still limited to 4, even though my lot, if I'm making the small lot, the minimum is 2,000 square feet? Is that,
Sure.
did I ask that question right?
Sure. Currently, we would cap that at still 4 units.
Cap that at what?
4 units total.
4 units per lot. Now, can I, if I'm doing a small lot development, subdivide into individual lots so I can sell the land with the house?
Yes.
Yes.
So then could I subdivide a 12,000 square foot lot into 6 small 2,000 square foot lots and then build small lot homes on it? Or does because the base, does that make sense?
Yeah, possibly.
If the geometry worked and the frontage and everything.
Yeah, one of the things that will happen as we go through, you know, if there is a legislative intent to move forward with this, is we'll look at these numbers and they will likely change somewhat, right? This is kind of still big picture. We haven't dug into deep detail and investigation yet. So, but yeah, it's possible that could be a scenario.
Okay, but my base zoning would still be R1 12,000, but because I'm electing to do a small lot development, I could subdivide down to 2,000 square feet lots.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that. I think Councilmember Dugan, your question about how this competes with the affordable housing incentives is probably the most interesting question and the most sort of critical one. Personally, I think that both proposals create affordable housing in different ways. One is by deed restricting it, but it still allows it to be very large homes, potentially. And the other, so that's what the affordable housing incentives is 2 of them would have to be deed restricted to affordable. But like, you could do a 4-plex and 2 of the properties could be very, very big and $1 million each or something like that. And then 2 of them would be deed restricted. But you could, under this, all 4 of them would have to be small. They're not deed restricted, but because they're small, they are naturally more affordable. And I really like that sort of kind of coming at the issue from 2 directions. And so I like that. I think the limitation on size of the dwelling is really important. The transmittal says it would allow it up to 1,600 square feet. Would that, but Durham's example is 1,200. Am I understanding that correct?
Yeah, so the proposal that we have in front of you is for 1,200 square feet and 1,600 square feet. The 1,200 square feet would be if you did 2 stories with a 800 square foot footprint. And the 1,600 would be if you did a basement and capped at 1 story of building height, 17 feet.
Oh, so
Does that
you can
make
do
sense?
a full basement and then an 800 square foot main floor, but you cannot do a second floor.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
And the second floor, if you did the second floor, it would be capped at 400 square foot by 1,600, 8 and 8.
It could be 6 and 6 though, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The idea is that because we would be, and I think this gets to a comment made earlier, because we would be essentially introducing more homes into what people are used to being backyards, is that single-story structures tend to have less of an impact on what people perceive to be one of those values of living in a single-family home. And so allowing those to have a bigger footprint is because those impacts are different. It's also a way that you could potentially get a 3 or even, a 3-bedroom type of thing. So we're not just introducing small tiny homes, but something that a family could grow into, so that we're repopulating our neighborhoods where our household size has decreased over the years.
Okay, so what would be the negative of just saying 1,200 square feet max, regardless of size? Do you think that would be, like, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think it would limit, right? I mean, anytime you're putting any kind of a governor on development, you're going to end up with some limitation. And so it really just depends on what's an acceptable level of that limitation.
Okay. But the lower the limitation, the smaller the house, the less the sales price would be.
Yeah.
I guess I'm open to either on that. I think, okay.
Councilmember
Those
Young.
are all my questions. Thanks.
Yeah, so I'm going to follow up on something from both the previous council members. I, too, am trying to see the distinction between what we've approved related to affordable housing, as well as like this proposal, and trying to then understand like why both are necessary, as opposed to like just the affordable housing continuing to be in that space. I don't think that's something I'm hoping for an answer to like today. But if there's an opportunity to see that in more like maybe a table format, like compare contrast, looking at some of those components, it would be helpful, just to be able to understand what the policy decisions and differences are. My concern, if that's helpful in terms of the why I would love to see that, I just don't want to move forward with like a broad scale approach in policy and zoning change at the city that then ultimately undermines the existing efforts for affordable housing. I appreciate, to Councilmember Mono's point, more housing should help affordability, period, an end of story. And yes, I agree with that premise. It's helpful for me to, though, understand, like, if we moved with this, with affordable housing, would anyone take advantage of that affordable housing effort? Or would we just see this becoming like the primary guidance of zoning moving forward because we think it yields affordable? Thank you.
We can certainly look into that.
And one thing I might say on that point is that one of the questions that we had was whether a bonus for, say, potentially someone might build a small lot dwelling, maybe, if they just built a single new small dwelling in the backyard and deed restricted it to a certain price, is there any value in maybe providing some sort of a bonus to encourage people from using maybe both? That's also up for discussion. We would love to hear thoughts on that.
And that is something that in Portland they do. So they allow 4 dwelling units, just like this idea would, but then they have a 2-unit bonus if they're affordable. So ultimately you could get 6 units. I can't remember what success they've seen from both of those, or from the 2 affordable unit, but we can.
And I think that just, yes. And for me, that's helpful to know, like, so if we wanted to maintain both in terms of like both having that add-on incentive, like, for me, that is of interest to know, like, so what do solutions in that area look like that allow us to both continue to provide that affordable housing, opportunity and incentive in that space, while also, creating maybe a more flexible marketplace to be able to create these types of solutions organically.
Thank you. Thank you. I know this isn't about deed restrictions, but I just wanted to clarify that in our affordable housing incentives, that deed restrictions do expire.
I don't know the exact time frame, but I know there's just a certain number of years, right?
Yeah,
I believe it's 30.
yeah, 30
Okay.
years.
I think that'd be interesting to kind of compare and look at what that might look like in terms of market trends and forecasting housing availability if we adopt this. In terms of corner lots, my question, and I think I already understand the answer, but I'd love to better understand how we can maximize use. I've spoken with some residents that are moving from District 4, buying starter homes, specifically looking for corner lots on the west side. because they've been waiting for this opportunity, they're thinking the egress on a lateral side, they could stack townhomes and be able to compose more of the market themselves, so that way they can develop small and afford, you know, if you want to call it house hacking, that's their way. They can afford their way into home ownership. And so I'm just curious what your thoughts are in terms of how it would compose that type of ability.
Yeah, so corner lots do provide much more flexibility because they've tended to be larger. And so they have typically have a larger yard that can allow for development without removing the existing building, which is something that we're seeing with the affordable housing incentives. So I think as of maybe 2 weeks ago, we had 11 applications to utilize the affordable housing incentives. None of them have gotten to the building permit stage yet, but the majority of those applications have actually been with existing single-family dwellings, where most of those are additions to it to create basically a townhome development. So we can look at what people are proposing to get an idea of how that works and what's coming out of those.
I'd love to better understand that, especially if someone wants to exactly that, extend and have those opportunities, and then eventually segment, and, you know, if they want to sell it off independently or whatever that might look like.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a follow-up on that? Are those 11 applications in all zones or 11 applications in R1 zone?
That's total applications.
Total applications, okay.
And I think something that's been a little bit of a surprise to us is most of the applications have been in lower density districts.
Really?
Yeah, which I think we weren't really expecting. I think the total number of dwelling units between all 11 is about 135, but that's because there's one big project that
And a bunch of
is
small
already has LIHTC funding that's using it to make a staff level approval. So.
Got it. That's interesting. One additional thought that I have on the interface between this and the affordable housing incentives is I do think that the deed restriction and managing that is for both just the being able to like income qualify or deed restrict or like figure out all of those additional legal processes is a disincentive to using the affordable housing incentives. So I think this for people for whom financing and that is a disincentive, this allows another way to create density just with smaller units without having to do the headache of trying to convince the bank that they should finance this, even though 2 of the units are going to be deed restricted to a lower rent or a lower sales price. Like I have seen, if you're trying to get a bank loan, that banks don't understand the affordable housing incentives yet, and I think this is a lot cleaner, so they would understand how to finance this project because it doesn't have that restriction on it. So I think that there is an advantage to having both tools. I think the smaller the unit size, without getting so small that it's unlivable or that's like no one would want to live in a house that small. But I think the smaller the unit cap, the more it leaves room for the affordable housing incentives to still be effective and be enough of a driver to say, yeah, I'll get a bigger, I'll deed restrict my properties because I want the bigger units that I could sell 2 of them for much higher.
The other thing that it does is that there's zero long-term city oversight need. Like, we're not reviewing those reports, which, you know, the fact that we've had 11 applications in the first, 8 months that the affordable housing incentives have been in effect is to some degree causing us a little bit of heartburn 3 to 5 years down the road when we have to monitor if we keep getting that, 15 per year. That's a big shifting of workload.
I don't remember that.
So, which is something we identified as a risk.
I think so.
So
Yeah.
thank you again.
Uh,
Excuse me.
Love the discussion and on the, so you take your R1 12,000 or any other of these lots, you would have to go through the rezoning process to break it down into 2,000 square foot lots to sell those individual lots to individuals.
subdivision process.
So we go through, a subdivision process to do that and to approve that design. So, but they would be sold individually, those 4 lots.
Potentially, they could also rent them out if they want.
But they could have also, they could have rent them out too.
And the difference being that the subdivision process does not go to the council.
It does
The
only
noticing is a little different.
Right.
The small lot dwellings would be a permitted use
Okay.
across the board.
Right. So I'm open to all these ideas. I am always going back to the idea that we're talking affordable housing, which is wonderful. We need that affordable housing, but we also need affordable living. And so when we add this density to different areas and it's still not walkable, it's still not, you still can't get to the drive, you still can't get to your daycare, still can't get to your grocery store, still can't get anywhere, and you're still in the car. It does kind of defeats the purposes of this. So how does this interact with our other discussions we've had about mixed-use zonings and commercials where we have some commercial space there? Because adding 7 more units to this one small street is nice, and I can see that if people have one car, but if they still can't get anywhere on foot or by bicycle, I struggle with that. So how do we balance that, both sides here? I'm open to that, but I want to also make sure that we're balancing it, that we have affordable living process there too.
May I understand? I'm trying to understand your point. So if you can help me out. So let's say that this goes through and adding more units. What do you mean that they cannot get anywhere?
I'm just saying that it's nice to have it, but if there's no stores in the vicinity, that's what I'm saying, they can't get anywhere. There's not a walkable. I mean, if we have this affordable housing and there's corner stores and there's corner markets they can walk to, that's great. But if they're like out in the middle of nowhere and they have all these extra units, they're not. The affordable side of that is defeated because they have to get in their car to get everywhere. That's how do we balance that in whatever neighborhood you're talking about? I'm not specifically to any neighborhood. I'm just talking about across the board.
Okay.
How do we make sure that we're balancing that so that people are actually, it's affordable living, not just affordable housing?
We'll include that as part of our analysis.
Say it again. Sorry.
We'll do that as part of our analysis. We actually have a walkability map that we've produced based on local metrics that we're happy to show anyone who's interested in seeing it, that will come into our analysis and decision making.
Okay, and back to the idea that if you're currently a owner of a R1 lot, this doesn't affect you if you don't do anything to it. I mean, you got an R112, it doesn't change your R17, doesn't change it, R15 doesn't change it, because it's just really one, we're consolidating them all into one document, so it's easier to read and then easier to kind of follow for everybody to do that. But if you wanted to take your 12 to a 7 and a 5, you could do that, but that would be under the subdivision, a separate process.
Yeah, there will be a text amendment, but we went over what those, removing those things have been really problematic to, not just for us to administer, but for property owners to measure.
Right.
Those will change. But other than that, yeah, it's your individual property will only change if you choose to do something if you own one of those.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean your neighbor may choose to do something.
Absolutely. I just want to make it clear to people that, hey, nothing's changing to your lot if you're keeping it the same. I want to make sure that people thought, oh my God, something's going to change here to my lot. It's not changing that in that respect.
I think Councilmember Mono had another point. I have 2 questions, and then Jen Bruno has something too. Do you want to go first, or?
Yeah, I really appreciate Councilmember Dugan, your question about walkability of neighborhoods and corner stores and things like that. And I'll go back to something I said when we were talking about the MU zoning consolidation, which is I think that, and this would have to be a separate process, but I think it would really benefit our neighborhoods to go through in a separate planning process at some point to look at our predominantly residential zones and find nodes that would be good to rezone to MU2 or MU3 to allow those corner stores within our neighborhoods. But I know that the way I understand it, that wouldn't be able to be fit within this or within the MU zone consolidation, because this is not proposing a map amendment, and the MU zone consolidation doesn't touch our R1 zones.
And the council's already initiated an action for us to look at rezoning for more mixed use
Right.
in those areas. So that's something that's coming as the consolidation gets wrapped up.
Perfect. I appreciate that. Yeah. So I think what I think is the stated goal behind your question or what I imagine is the goal behind your question is accomplishable and we should do it, but it would probably have to be in a separate thing from either of those.
I also think, piggybacking on it, it's not exclusively a planning thing. The zoning's only going to get us so far, but when we start having conversations about economic development and where we're, what headwinds, I'm in one of the few places on the west side where you can walk to a grocery store, but most of my neighbors are not in a place where they can walk to a grocery store. A lot are not able to walk to a transit line. And every year when the Christmas videos come up, I'm at a difficulty to find a not eating establishment to profile in my economic. So this extends to not only streets, transportation, and those things, but it's almost like we in the council head have to have an overarching. It's expecting too much of zoning, in my opinion, when there's just not been the economic investment or the strategy to make those things happen. We can enable, but we're not going to make it a reality through this, I think.
So, sorry, were you finished?
Yeah.
Okay. So is there any carve out or exception for historic districts?
The protection of the historic overlays would still remain in place.
Okay, so even this change would, it wouldn't undo any.
Correct. Any new dwellings that would be built would still have to go through the new construction process.
Okay. The other question I want to ask is, I think you all have heard me, you're probably sick of me saying that one of the things that I really like about my area, the city, Avenues, and Marmalade, is you have such a different kinds of housing right next to each other. Mm-hmm. And I think that what some of my residents would say that have been in the area for a long time is that, yes, the outcome is good, and I think is what contributes to the character, but the process to getting there in the 70s and 80s was bad. I lived in the Avenues in the early 80s, but I didn't read and didn't understand zoning, so I don't remember specifically, but I wonder if you could speak to that, and because I like the result in that I think that there are lots of creative ways to add density, and I think that it provides a lot of opportunity for uniqueness and creative solutions to our housing issues. I think that it does make the neighborhood more interesting. However, I want the good parts and none of the bad parts. So can you speak to that? Like, is this the right process to get to more of that outcome? Is this a better road than the road that was taken in the 70s and 80s?
Yes, I'm going to say it definitely is. And that's primarily because we have more tools in place now, one being those historic district protections. And in our older parts of the city, even though the state code has somewhat restricted us from being able to apply certain design elements, in areas developed before 1950, we still can, whether it's in a historic district or not. So we have that in those tools in place already. We have much better design focused standards as well, and we're seeing that in some of the new buildings that have been built, particularly the smaller scale buildings in the city. So coupled with those things, that's how you have development that fits in, and we can avoid some of those things that happened in the 70s, particularly in the Avenues, Central City, and our historic districts, but also in those areas that are outside of historic districts too, where that continued up through the mid, 15, 20 years ago, which led to some of these regulations that are now problematic. So having those things in place, I think those standards, particularly for how a building fits, and being able to adjust those to help us achieve our affordability goals and our housing goals, but also with a reduced impact on what that character of the neighborhood is important. And so I think we do have those tools, and we can do it better than the 70s.
Yes, and then Jennifer.
I had a final comment just because you mentioned Central City. Denver Street is a great example where you see a lot of, single family zoned homes and then maybe an ADU in the background that were built in the 80s or row homes even. I just wanted to mention, because it echoes in the back of my mind, a resident that I met campaigning that had his easement taken away in this process. And I know that seems a little bit more granular, but just thinking about some of the homes that might be affected on the west side where there's shared easements or shared property lines and some confusion there. I think I'm really excited by this. I just want to recognize some of our residents don't realize the grandeur or the potential of their properties. And I think taking into accountability some of these processes, Denver Street definitely is not zoned for single families anymore, unfortunately. And so the backlash that happened there is we have two neighbors stuck between giant towers, totally different dilemmas, but both of the easements were taken away and restricted, and now they're in lawsuits. So just want to raise that awareness.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think when the council is considering proposals that maybe don't fit neatly into a rezoning category, the council has discussed ways to make sure that we adequately notify the community of the different things that are part of the proposal. And when the council did the affordable housing incentives, the council office voluntarily paid for a citywide mailer to let everyone know what affordable housing incentives is, what it isn't. I think what we learned from that process is that maybe in hindsight we could have done notifications at different points in the process because we were already pretty far down the line when we did that citywide mailer. So I don't know if the council wants to discuss with the administration what makes sense in terms of engagement. Maybe you guys have already thought of that. But there's not a requirement for a text amendment, but if people are going to see that their neighbor might develop their property differently than they're otherwise expecting, it'd be good to let them know.
May I?
Yes, go ahead.
So thank you. I obviously, believe that we need to, at core, inform our neighbors about what we're working, but I also worried about what that will do to the process, because what will happen is, and most likely those neighbors that are in tune and they have the privilege to show up and to participate will stack these meetings with hundreds of opposition messages when we're still trying to gather facts and try to get some level of consensus. Not to say that we still need to get those, and there is some good pieces of information that we have never thought from those neighbors too. I just would like us to get some core objectives of what we agree first before we start, asking for the feedback. So if we're going to go that way, I would love for us to really narrow it down a bit, and then that we are aware that we are going to get the feedback that we seek for, and that's okay. But I just want us to also realize that we're not going to get a lot of the feedback that is still out there from when we are asking. Mr. Chair, now so I have a few questions, and in general relate to the maximum building coverage one, and why, are there ways of reducing some of that, and the purpose? I need to understand the purpose of this. I understand that we don't want to necessarily, have construction that covers, all of the space, and there are reasons for that. But why those numbers? Then I also, I'm curious about the front yard. I understand that you're simplifying and consolidating some of these things, removing the average between multiple properties. Why that number? How do we get to that number that you are suggesting there, which is 20 feet, if I remember right? And then questions regarding to the legal non-conforming lots, which there is plenty of, and how will these changes affect or not those lots. So, I know I just threw a bunch of questions, and I will restate it, but I was saving all my comments. When we're talking about demand and supply, and we're talking about trying to solve one of the biggest issues that we faced, the supply of housing is as important as the amenities. And not having the amenities in a neighborhood, I think it is a result of the lack of supply. So if we want to see some of those coffee shops and some of those little markets, most likely it is because there is not enough demand for those markets in a given area. And by allowing more neighbors to move into a neighborhood, most likely we're going to see a little coffee shop pop in, and we're going to see some of those little amenities in some of the neighborhoods. Yes, there are some restrictions that our city is putting into those too, but we have in my district and in yours and in many of ours business nodes that have yet come to fruition, that we dream that they become business nodes, that they are already permitted. And by allowing some more neighbors to take part of our neighborhoods, our established neighborhoods, we will see some of those amenities that we dream in our neighborhoods to come in. So this is, in general, I see this attempt into not only simplifying the code, which is huge, minimizing the impact of the code into our city staff, which is creating a lot of work. And I also see it as attempting to solve one of the biggest issues that we see today, which is the lack of housing in our city. So now that was my little speech. I would like to get to the maximum building coverage, a little understanding how those numbers come in and why. I remember a few years ago we made some changes to that for a different zone. The front yard, why it needs to be that size, and then the answer to legal non-conforming lots.
Yeah, so I think a lot of those will probably, just in the interest of time, we'll probably have to respond in writing for those, and that might be the better way to do it because we can give you a more detailed answer than what I'm going to be able to throw out right now. So hopefully that's acceptable.
No, that's totally. I mean, I am learning, too. I understand that, there is a reason for all of those. I also see it in my own district, historical houses that are in legal non-conforming. I keep saying the wrong word. Lots. And that, it seems like the code as it is right now is incentivizing the neighbor to destroy the house, build new, which is, to me, is a tragedy, right? The house is still in good shape, and they, by increasing maybe, a little bit, it will solve many other problems for the neighbor. But I just want to understand how all of these things work out together. I appreciate your answer later.
Okay, I have another question. I'm sorry. Can you just walk me through the thought process of consolidating these three into one, as opposed to if we just consolidated the 7,000 and the 5,000, and why just the R series instead of any other?
So the primary reason is that the R zones really have two main differences. That's the minimum lot size, and then some of the particularly the side yard setbacks are different. There's some smaller things too, like lot coverage and things like that. But for the most part, the regulations between those three zones are the same. So that's why we want to consolidate that, just so it's just easier to see. In the past, someone will make changes to like the R17, and then it's slightly different, so we have to interpret things differently in those zones. So that's the primary reason.
Okay. And would this be correct to say that, let's say hypothetically, we passed an ordinance that consolidates the R series zones, but it doesn't allow new dwelling types? Does that just mean we're going to have a house that's going to take up a bigger portion of the lot, but not add units? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. The only way you're going to get more units is to change that regulation.
Okay, and then the inverse of that, if we just allow new dwelling types, but we don't make any changes we don't consolidate, does that?
Well, so by consolidating, we're not changing those minimum lot areas and things like that. So we're putting them all in one table, basically.
Right.
And so if you allow, if one of the options is to just allow different housing types, but we would have to come up with regulations for those housing types that fit, because right now they're not going to fit into the standards for what is basically a detached single-family home.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Dugan, I think you had a question too.
Yeah, just a comment. Also, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And just Councilmember Apui, and I'm in favor, because we're going to get comments starting right now about this discussion. They're coming right now. The people are just typing them up right now, and in all their whatever their opinions are, they're typing them right now because there's a lot of concern across the board about this. So we need to lead turn on how we can't lead turn anymore because we're behind. But this is a start of the process, so we need to kind of make sure that we are educating our public for this, because public discussions and transparency is a bedrock that we stand on, and we fight against that across the board through current administrations where they are trying to limit that discussion. We don't want to squelch that discussion. We want to foster that discussion. We want to foster that in a very healthy manner. And we want to foster that discussion in a healthy manner. And I think this is kind of what Pui is also saying, is we want to foster that in a healthy manner so that we actually do hear from other people, because we do get some really great inputs, just like the input we got from this one individual on this discussion. I mean, some really healthy inputs, and we want to make sure that we foster that. But we also want to make sure we foster that on a basis of here's where we're standing right now, here's where the facts are, here's where we're looking at, but we're also saying that, hey, we're not there yet either, because we're still kind of melding this whole discussion here. So we want to make sure we do that. We want to make sure we do that in a positive way. And if it takes another week, then that's okay. You also need to make sure that there is going to come time where you just got to cut and make a decision. And the second thing is, again, I think we also in an agreement too, that we're talking about R1 zones, and R1 zones, there aren't many MU2s and MU3s, since they're not really there yet anyways, right, in those areas. So we want to make sure that those can coexist, because right now, you can't build a store at the corner lot because it's an R1 house. So we need to change that, but we need to kind of work that together. So again, we can build this together, and the guy goes, oh, I'm going to change my MU2, and I'm going to put a coffee shop here, and I'm going to have my apartment above it, and I'm going to love that. And then now you have a walkable community, and that's when I go back to these small towns like in Europe or in Portland and other areas where the coffee shop is every 4 blocks, and you're like, hey, this is great. So I think those need to come together, and I think we're getting there. It will take some time, and we need the patience to make sure we get it right, but also make sure we don't overextend ourselves too at the same time. So thank you very much.
Councilmember Romano.
Thanks. I have a couple specific questions / thoughts, and then I'll share like my general thoughts. But the building coverage percentage, in my mind, that's not necessary if we're saying a minimum lot size and a maximum footprint size. It's like seems unnecessary to do. Am I missing something?
Those are the things that we'll dig into as we get more research to figure out what that ends up looking like.
And then with the density bonus, I'm trying to wrap my mind, and maybe this is probably going to be the same answer, but wrap my mind around how we would do a density bonus. It's like you have to do 2,000 square foot lots, but one of them can be a duplex, or like how would that work? Or should we just say if you're preserving additional house or making small dwellings and affordable housing, then your minimum lot size goes down to 1,600 or something instead of 2,000? I can't wrap my head around how that works, but I personally like the idea of the density bonuses. So I would be supportive of both of those. And then I think the question is like, can they be stacked, or is it just one or the other? And
yeah.
I imagine that's going to be the
All
same
things
answer
that we gotta figure
need to
out.
dig into. To my general thought is I like this a lot. It actually is a little more toned down than what I was hoping to do, which I think under our last time that we were briefed on this, there was the idea of maybe we just change everything to FBUN1 or like SR3. And I liked that a little bit more just because it's an established zone that we have some history with. But what I do like about this is the small dwelling restriction that would go into place, so that regardless of lot size, the house cannot be bigger than X number of square feet, because I do see that as a really good way to create maybe not entirely affordable, but less expensive housing. It's not like I was hoping we'd go even a little further, but I appreciate where it's headed. And I think personally, I would like us to support this direction. And I would like it to go as quickly as possible rather than trying to spend the next year going over all of the potential things. I think this is good, solid policy, and I'd like us to push it forward quickly.
Okay. I'm just chairing, so can make whatever motions or straw polls they want.
So, go ahead.
Councilmember Young.
Can I just ask a question? So I guess I'm struggling on the straw poll requests today, just because I still have questions related to like how this overlays with the affordable housing piece. If I am the only one, I can live with that, but I guess that's where I'm struggling to be like, yes, no, like on all of these pieces, not knowing how those two interact.
Yeah, I'm also in that place, even though I already got to have an extra meeting today, but on this. But yeah, I still have those. I mean, there are some of the bigger ones I feel like I'm not as ready to vote on as some of the smaller ones. But
yeah, like the density bonus, I'm here for. Some of the others, like I think just still questions before I'm like an up down.
And
can I just ask them a question? What, I know you would like us to give you guidance on all of these today. Which ones can we move forward with, and would be easiest for us to frame to the public to help kind of guide the feedback that we get? Like, these are the things we're considering. Come and tell us what you think, as opposed to just.
I think from our perspective, if the council wants to initiate a legislative intent, you can define that. We're comfortable moving forward with whatever the council wants us to move forward with.
Yes, of course. But
in my mind, I think like
what's the minimum you're comfortable moving forward?
in my mind, I think the fork in the road, and I don't know, you guys feel free to jump in, would be, are you okay adding different building types on single family lots? Because that to me feels like you're going on one path or you're going on a different path. And in my mind, consolidating the R1 zones and simplifying it for ease of use is something that, they can do anyway. That, just like you're consolidating like RMF 35 and 45, but proposing to do multiple dwelling units on a single family lot is a major policy choice that I think they are looking for your guys' feedback on. But I understand if you don't feel ready to decide that today. And I think the timing is also up to the council. To Councilmember Mono's point, if you want it done sooner, then obviously the sooner you take those straw polls, the better. But if council members are not comfortable moving forward, there's no requirement saying that needs to be done by X, Y, Z date.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I guess the way I am thinking of the straw poll is not that you indicating support of this is indicating support to vote yes on it when it finally comes to us. It's just indicating support that this general direction is something we want staff to spend more time on. So I think it would be totally appropriate to say, yes, keep researching this and bring us an ordinance. And then for you to still say, or Councilmember Young, for you to still say, I'm not satisfied with this and how it overlays with affordable housing incentives, and I'm going to vote no in the end. Like, to me, that would be a very reasonable thing for a council member to do. But, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, but my sense is that what they're really asking us is, should we keep working on this and spend more time in this? This is the direction we're thinking. And so I would ask that we support them in pushing it forward so that we can get to a point where it actually goes through the Planning Commission, they give us their thoughts, and then we can debate these questions that we're still having. I think in no way is an indication of support on a straw poll today, an indication that you're going to vote yes in the end, is the way I would ask us to look at that. But is that?
Yeah, I think that's what we're looking for is just a legislative intent to initiate that process. So, we're at the point where I think we've done the research we're going to do, and the only way we can do more is if we start putting together some regulations, studying those, doing some fit tests, things like that, and then kind of finalizing something that can go through a public process. So that starts with that initiation. Without initiation, we're going to just kind of be at a standstill.
And so I guess my hope is that the council would support a straw poll to move forward with these. I would support all of these that are listed on our sheet right here, and then add in our legislative intent to ensure that the overlap between this project and affordable housing incentives is part of that next phase of your work. So you can give us thoughts on that.
And I'll say I'm good with the latter in terms of saying, like, yes, I think that we should move forward in terms of being able to continue the dialogue and the conversation, getting the feedback from Planning Commission. Like, when it comes to any of these individual pieces, like, I don't know if I'm in that space to be like, thumbs up, thumbs down, like right now at this moment, but I do support the action to move forward with the recommendations of staff when it comes to then having the broader conversation so that we can get to like a decision point while we're still looking at those overlap areas.
I appreciate what both of you said, and I mean that is part of kind of what's going through my mind as I don't want to signal not only to the public but to some of you that the way I straw poll on these might be how I vote on the ultimate outcome. So thanks for kind of putting that out there and clearing the air. And for me, I'll just tell you where I'm at since I can't propose the poll. It's the consolidation and the new dwelling types that I don't want to say, that I'm afraid to say one way or the other. I want to hear more information. I think all the other ones I'm pretty comfortable with. The first one and the second or the third to the last. That's where I'm at.
So what if I'd like to shake things up a little bit and see maybe there is a path to allow for more research and give you the indication that some of us may be interested in learning more. I don't know if anybody really felt, maybe please stop me if I speak out of line. I don't think anybody here, just judging by the comments, felt completely opposed to any pieces of what it was presented. Certainly there are some questions and some thoughts, and maybe there is some concerns, but no one had it like gut saying hell no to any piece, just from judging from what I heard. So well satisfied that we gave, instead of giving you a line by line, giving you a general keep on researching and keep on giving us more feedback on these topics. Will you feel, or should we divide it into the pieces that we are totally okay with and the pieces that we're not?
If there's a piece that we have consensus on, I think that's important since this is a lot of research in a lot of directions. I also think if there is like an aggregate that we want to give, I think guiding principles might be important. So for me, what I love about this is responsive to every trend that we know is coming. We know that we are reducing in family size, and we've got a lot of big houses that potentially could follow a model like what we see in the suburbs of Boston in Newton, where the old Victorians have been separated into duplexes and triplexes, and it puts homeowners and home ownership more into the hands of everyday. Home ownership is more approachable, and then homeowners are more self-determined in how they participate or don't in solving this. And so it's not just reliant on developers and apartment buildings and lack of home ownership. So for me, that's a guiding principle. If you have a way to increase density while increasing the autonomy of a homeowner and the approachability of home ownership for others, like that's a proposal I want to see. So I agree with you, Ale, maybe not everything, but I think it's important for us to maybe parse out a few guiding principles here about what we're committed to. I'm deeply disinterested in worrying about if people have to wave each other through on a street because off-street parking is the big deal. I do it every day in Rose Park. I know it's not super exciting when it's not something you do, but I know it's something that can be accommodated easily. I am interested in giving homeowners the tools they need to participate and for us to increase density, potentially without eliminating some beautiful large homes that might not function as they historically have going into the future.
So my question to you, does it change anything if we give you an overarching, or you prefer the more direction? I mean, directly, like, does it change the research? Does it change your how you're going to direct your staff if we went one by one versus to give you a more of a generic answer?
No, I think if you can give a generic answer, we can rely on the questions, the conversation that you've had, and the research we've already done to develop that proposal and refine it and get it to a point where it's more concrete. For us, though, like I said, the big thing is that actual initiation through legislative intent. Once that happens, we're ready to roll. We can keep the council updated as much as you'd like through that process. If you want us to put together a work plan and send it through so you have it, you can see it, we're happy to do those kinds of things.
I think that sort of eliminates some of doesn't eliminate the concerns. We have heard the concerns here, and I share some of them too. I want to learn a little more. And ultimately, I might be, potentially voting no on some pieces too. Eventually, I don't know. Obviously, this lines up with my general direction of where I want to see our city to go. But I think if we give you a general straw poll, maybe it accomplishes the same thing that we want to accomplish here. So I will be open to propose right now a straw poll to generally support the more research and the more work that you have done on the R1 consolidation, and hoping to learn more from, for example, item number 2, which is item number 1, the actual consolidation, which seems to be some of the bigger pieces, and item number 8, I call them through this list here, which is the allow new dwelling types item, and I'm sure that the density bonus was another piece of the conversation. So that will be my straw poll on the table right now, and see if we can just move forward.
Can I kindly amend and add to your straw poll? I would say to add in like the guiding principle that we want to see more affordability. And so whatever that looks like, I would like to know what those solutions are. I would be reticent to making large scale changes without that attention to are those going to yield more affordability, knowing that nobody controls that directly, but from a policy standpoint, that's important to me.
Accepted.
Thank you.
Okay. So we have a straw poll that, as amended. Does everyone understand it? Okay.
So I have a question on it. So the straw poll basically is saying we'll do a legislative intent to ask them to keep moving.
To move forward, yes.
But we still have to actually do a legislative intent. Like that has to come on a formal meeting at some point, right?
Process-wise, I think Brian will work on language. We'll use this conversation to help inform the language, and we'll shop it around so that the council's comfortable with it before it's on the next formal meeting.
Okay, great.
You keep saying things, and it makes me think of something that I had that I forgot to say. The only other question too I would ask about what Councilmember Mono said, and maybe you can address this as well, is if Councilmember Mono is saying even a house that isn't as big as it could be helps address affordability in one way, because it if it was a mansion, it would be more expensive. I agree with that principle. I also, though, know that we've had a lot of conversations about family-sized housing, and so I would want to know how does that impact the puzzle as well. So I guess that's just an add to the legislative intent. But other than that, I think we're ready to show our feelings.
I'll make a comment after the straw poll.
Okay. Go ahead. Okay,
Just
we'll
my
work on
comment, it's really to the council itself, because these straw polls have generated a lot of questions we all have. So we need to make sure we get those questions, or get maybe even our thoughts on some of these straw polls to the plane, so they have an idea of where we're sitting. Do we want it 45 feet? Do we want it 15 feet? Do we want it 5 feet? Do we want it 30 feet? Do we want it 6, 2, whatever it is? Let's make sure we get those questions to the plane, so that we're not waiting for the next council meeting to bring up questions and then have 2 more months of deliberation here.
Okay.
Let's make sure we bring their questions to the plane now.
I'll do my best, but some of my best questions come when we're all together. So, thanks. Okay. Move on. Thank you all. Thanks for your work on this.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're on item number 4, zoning map amendment at approximately 704 East, 900 South extension.
I actually think it's number 3.
Oh, it is. I'm sorry. So an ordinance for a zoning map amendment at approximately 455 and 475 East and 5th West or South.
This is a proposal from America First Credit Union to rezone those 2 properties you mentioned from their current RMU 45 or residential mixed use to RO, which is residential office. This would allow demolition of an existing structurally unsound parking structure and replace it with a taller structure. The proposal also includes adding a mixed-use development on the eastern property. The applicant is with us and would appreciate an opportunity to address the council. And with that, I'll turn it over to Amanda.
Thank you. This petition has been in the works since 2022, and we're here before you today to discuss the proposed zoning and options for the applicant to move forward. Next slide, please. A little bit of background on the site. There's 2 properties with this proposed rezone on the corner of 500 East, 500 South, where the existing America First Credit Union branch is located. The larger parcel has the existing office building, a drive-through, and a 2-story parking structure that's about 33 feet tall. There's 147 stalls within the existing structure and 23 surface stalls. The smaller property contains an office building and surface parking with 11 stalls. Next slide, please. The request is to rezone both properties from RMU 45 to RO. The purpose of going to the RO district is to allow for greater building height. The proposed parking structure, which would be on the larger parcel and would replace the existing non-complying parking structure, would be 52 feet tall, 5 levels, and provide almost 200 stalls of additional parking. Next slide, please. As you know, there's upcoming amendments to city code. The subject property has been identified by the city to be rezoned to MU5. If the property was rezoned to RO prior to the adoption of the zoning consolidation, it would automatically be rezoned to MU6 because the RO zone will no longer exist. And the reason we're putting this before you today is to give the option of developing under the RO zone instead of the MU zones. Next slide, please. So existing property limitations. The properties have always been rezoned for multifamily and office uses. The most recent zoning map change was in 2012. That rendered the parking structure non-compliant and the drive-through teller lanes non-conforming uses. Under the existing zoning and the proposed RO zoning, the non-complying structure and non-complying use would remain. Next slide, please. I have a few zoning comparisons. We'll skip through them. If we need to go back, then we can do that for more details. The current parking structure is non-complying in height, as the RMU 45 zone only allows 20 feet for non-residential uses. And it's also non-complying for the rear yard setback. If rezoned to RO, the proposed parking structure would remain non-compliant with the required rear yard, corner side yard, and interior side yard setbacks of the zone, which has more substantial setback requirements than the existing RMU 45 zoning district. These larger setbacks are to offset the allowable building height, which is 60 feet unless the property is adjacent to a district with a greater max height. Just north of the subject property, it's zoned TSA, so the allowable building height for the larger parcel would be 90 feet, although they're proposing around 52 feet. Next slide, please. We can skip over that. Next slide. Yep, perfect. Okay, so for the development potential, I'm going through I have a bunch of pictures. I'll go through them quickly. This slide has the subject property number 1 and number 2. You can see the existing America First Credit Union building as well as the existing 2-story office building. The site overall has 8 driveway access points. So I'll be going through those really quickly. Next slide. Here's the AFCU site from 500 South with 2 driveways leading to the drive-through. Next slide, please. Surrounding properties, there's a local landmark site on 500 East. Existing office buildings on the west side of 500 East are also zoned RMU 45. Their allowable building height, if rezoned, would remain at 60 feet because they're not adjacent to TSA zoning. Next slide, please. And then here is the site from Denver Street. Denver Street has a lot of parking on the west side of the street and then apartment buildings and on the east side of the street. Next slide, please. And then here are photos of the existing parking structure and a sky bridge that crosses over the structure to the America First Credit Union building. Next slide, please. This is the originally proposed site plan. So the existing parking structure would essentially be rebuilt in the same footprint except for taller. The yellow are the existing curb cuts. If it moved forward, staff would recommend closing some curb cuts. There's a sky bridge connecting to the 2 structures. Previously, it was determined that the sky bridge was a substantial connection between the 2 buildings, and so they are being reviewed as one structure moving forward. So any standards would apply to the structure as a whole. Next slide, please. Existing parking, so the rezone really is based around the parking. So the existing MU 45 zone, they overall have 181 stalls. If it's rezoned to RO, there would be 227 parking stalls. That being said, there is no parking limit when parking is within a structure. The site is just under a quarter mile away from the trolley track station, and so I put the parking context on here just for context, but most of the parking is proposed to be within this proposed structure. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the one that really just gets to the meat of the discussion. None of the proposed zoning districts perfectly would allow this structure to be built by right. So the existing zoning doesn't allow the proposed height, and then the structure as proposed doesn't meet all of the setback requirements. The proposed RO zone, which is what the applicant is proposing, would allow the height, but the setbacks for the rear side and interior side yard would need plan development approval from the Planning Commission to move forward. The RO zone does not have any design standards associated with it, which is concerning to staff, and that's one of the reasons we're recommending denial of the petition. So that's for the RO zone. If nothing happens and it's not rezoned and automatically goes to MU5 from the RMU 45 or MU6, the proposed development would be considered a storefront building type. I spoke about the sky bridge. The proposed building height under either zone would be allowed, and setbacks would be, I'm not sure 100%, but pretty much allowed. There's minimal or to none allowed in both zoning districts. And then I don't have open space requirements, but I don't believe they would be met based on the current site plan. If the property was rezoned to MU5 from the existing zoning, the drive-through would turn from a non-complying or non-conforming use into a conditional use. So the drive-through could be moved as long as it meets the new standards. In both MU5 and MU6, the project would need design review approval. The building, we're reviewing this as one, once again, does not meet the design standards related to ground floor use, glass percentages, street-facing facade length, or blank walls. Next slide, please. Okay, and then back to the RO zoning that's before us today. Next slide, please. Standards of approval, so consistency with adopted plans, whether it furthers the purpose of the zoning district, potential impacts on adjacent properties, and adequacy of public facilities. Next slide. So both properties were rezoned from RO to RMU 45 in 2012 as part of the 400 South Livable Communities project, which was establishing TSA zoning along the corridor. There are no design standards associated with the RO zone. The maximum building height is 60 feet, which the project would meet unless adjacent to a district with a higher max, and then the height allowance would go to 90 feet. So the larger property could technically have a building height of 90. And then, as stated in the purpose statement, for zoning map amendments, the amendment process is not intended to relieve particular hardships, nor to confer special privileges or rights upon any person, but only to make adjustments and necessary in light of changed conditions or changes in public policy. There haven't been changes in public policy that would warrant going from a mixed-use zone to the RO zone at this time. And then both zones, since this petition has been submitted, are slated to be consolidated into form-use zones moving forward. And next slide. Adopted plans, the Central City Community Plan, the zoning map amendment does align with the future land use designation and nearby zoning. However, it fails to adequately address the community plan goals of creating livable communities, sustainable commerce, and active public spaces, and it does conflict with some mobility objectives. In Plan Salt Lake, the initiatives in Plan Salt Lake support neighborhood business districts as they do provide essential services, which a financial institution is, and amenities to residents. So while financial institutions are recognized as a necessity, the proposed rezone runs contrary to many of the sustainability, placemaking, and pedestrian-oriented initiatives and plans within the city. Next slide. So if the zoning consolidation is adopted and this property remains RMU 45, it would go to MU5. If it's rezoned before the zoning consolidation is adopted, it would move to MU6. The applicant could build their structure to the desired height, but they would need to redesign to meet the storefront design standards. And then just finally, while we acknowledge the financial institution's value to the community and the burden of having this dilapidated structure on the site, the request for the rezone conflicts with adopted city plans, and so therefore the Planning Commission recommended denial to rezone from RMU 45 to RO. Thank you. Please let me know if you have questions.
I'd like to start. Thank you for the presentation. I got to meet with them and Councilmember Young separately. And since then, I'm a little confused because I think I was expecting to hear a little bit more about the potential for mixed-use development, both retail and residential mixed on it. Was there anything that would like to be brought up that was excluded from this presentation?
They've submitted different plans.
Right.
The second parcel, recently they submitted an idea to create a mixed-use building. That would be allowed by right moving forward. And so I didn't review it. I don't have the dimensions, but if it was rezoned to any of the zoning districts, that would be allowed by right. They are.
Sorry. Okay, the applicant's here. Do we want to let them speak? Ask the questions? Okay. Go ahead and come on up. So.
just meeting some of your staff in person after a little while. They're amazing. I do want to, my name is Rick Magnus. I'm with AWA Engineering. To my right is Jake Tate, also with AWA Engineering. We are the consulting engineers for America First Credit Union. And to the far right is Tim Sneidman here. Oh, I'm so sorry, Amanda. That's Amanda, okay. Back there is Tim Sneidman, and he is with America First Credit Union. This has been going on for a long time, and if I can, I just want to also give compliments to staff. Sometimes they aren't heard publicly as saying what a good job they do, but they actually do. And this has been in front of the city for quite a while, so we appreciate staff as well. You really have a good staff. So, what AFCU, just as a little bit of a background, AFCU has been at this site for about 40 years now. This building has been there for quite a while, the structure and everything. The goal of AFCU is to be a regional office complex for AFCU in the Salt Lake Valley and other places. To be able to function like that, they need to, you'll see what we're proposing, and let's see if we get close to that, because once again, it's an existing structure. There are 2 of the 5 floors on this office structure that cannot be used because there is not enough parking, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit for you. But as you can see, if you can go to the next slide, I got to remember to cue that up. This just explains that we've been there a long time. We serve the community there financially. This is an important keystone to all the functioning areas of businesses and customers alike, okay? Next slide, please. Right now, the existing conditions, once again, 5-story office building. I think if you're familiar with this site over there on like 5th and 5th, you have the branch that serves on the bottom floor. There are a couple of other extensions of AFCU that serve in this building, but nowhere near to the capacity of being able to provide the number of jobs that they'd like to here. Also, there is a office building and a connection of as mentioned by Amanda, there's a significant connection between the structure of the parking structure and the main office building, to consider this as one structure and being able to provide for this area. There's also that 2-story office building that's at the corner of 5th South and 5th East. That is currently vacant, and you'll see a site plan that kind of takes into consideration what we want to do there. If you'll go to the next slide. So the parking structure, it is currently unrepairable condition. It is unsafe, and it has been closed. It used to provide 143 parking stalls, but now we cannot provide that for this structure. Once again, that's why one of the main reasons we're here for this zone change request is because of the lack of availability of parking on site. A few of these floors of the office building cannot be occupied. So if we could go to the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. It was kind of kicked around possibly of having a development agreement to meet, as Amanda mentioned. There's no one-size-fits-all in any type of zoning classification. So the idea of a possible development agreement, for example, there's the potential of having about 300 jobs at this site. That's very significant. That's a good generator for employment. Looking at the ratio of what we want to provide as far as parking and what would be required, or how many employees we would have, you actually would have about a 26% need for multimodal transportation to get those others in there, and that does support some of the plans and general plans of the city. also about activating Denver Street. It's really hard because the current configuration of Denver Street functions more like an alley. There are no parking. The parking structure, ingress and egress, is along there. The only significant retail office kind of function is the offices for the existing apartment building there. It's about 30 feet in frontage of Denver Street. And then there is no other connectivity, no engagement of any type of office, of retail. And so what we are looking to do in a possible development agreement situation is to compromise and provide a mixed-use retail and or office building with residential on top. And I'll kind of jump into that a little bit. Photovoltaic panels on the top floor of this structure of,
Sorry,
is that 5 minutes?
I know.
If I can just wrap up this specific one, that I think we're okay. There's just a couple of points.
Okay.
Is that all right?
We're pretty strict on it, but
Okay.
which points? Where?
If you'll just look, that we do agree that if we need to enter into a development agreement, we would do this mixed-use residential building on the corner of 5th and 5th, where we have that 2-story structure now. That would bring more engagement in an area that would be very appropriate rather than on Denver Street. And the photovoltaics are going to allow us to be about 65% less consumption of energy, which is also very important to the city.
Great. We'll have council members ask questions, and you can probably.
And that's
put
fine.
some of
Thank
the
you so
information in.
much.
Yeah, of course. Sorry, it always goes faster than
Can
you
we
think.
go, though, to the next slide? Only.
Just to leave it on the
I just want to leave it on this because this will help with
Okay.
discussion, I think.
Great.
There
Thank you
go.
so much.
Yes.
Questions, council members?
Hi, I would love to get to a yes on this. This is my bank, so improvements here will make me happy. Is it possible that we retain the mixed-use concept and do some sort of ground floor activation or wrapping on the garage that wouldn't make it just an entity where cars go to sleep? We pushed another corporate entity on this pretty hard and are maintaining a hard line with this across the city. And I'm actually, to the chagrin of my co-councilors, probably the biggest parking advocate. Even in New York City, 50% of the residents maintain cars. So I really want to get to yes on this, but we need to match the pushing that we're doing to other corporate entities.
So my name is Jake Tate, by the way, AWA. So I think the big issue there is, yes, we can. And if we do some type of a mixed use on that ground floor, it basically takes all the parking off of that ground floor. Just the size of it, no parking will be available. We'll have to skip up to the next floor before we park. Our concerns with it is mainly just feasibility. If you think you're going westbound on 5th South, it's on the backside, so you're not seeing any building that's going to be there. There's no advertising. There's no way to see that business. You're only going to be seeing people who walk along
But
Denver
that's
Street.
a high pedestrian area. I mean, isn't that Coffee Break right there? Is that where I park to go to Coffee Break? Yeah, so I mean, it's a high pedestrian, especially with First Step House is there. Like, you're
Yeah.
right, like driving by, it might be missable, but I think the pedestrian experience there is important. Also, being able to park cars somewhere in the downtown area is important. So this is a both and to me.
But we're talking about Denver Street or 500 East?
So he was talking about doing ground floor activations on the parking garage facing Denver Street would be a little
Yeah,
complicated.
Denver
because
Street
of
is-
lack of visibility because it's a one-way street, only allowing you to come westbound.
Yeah, so you're not getting the activation from the vehicular traffic, and the only people on that street are those maybe in the apartment buildings. I mean, it's an alleyway, essentially, and that's our concern is we're setting up a vacant space that won't be able to be leased.
Councilmember Young.
So I too have used this bank. So as a part of that, I think there's two pieces for me to build on what Councilmember Petro is saying. First and foremost, to replace parking with parking for me is a very different conversation than to build new parking structures where we could have other buildings. And I think that that's why I view the request related to the parking garage differently than maybe some of the previous conversations. The other piece to it is your proposal does speak to bringing in additional employees to the area. And I do wonder about the mixed use that she's asking for on Denver Street related to amenities that would serve those employees. And I think that that's probably, from my perspective, like where the win is. You're right. You're not going to get somebody who maybe is really reliant on that foot traffic or that visibility. But what could exist there that would be utilized by that existing employee base to be able to have that ground floor activation? It's just the question I would pose back.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Councilmember.
Will you remind me again what the current parking slottage is, and then the allotted parking that you're asking for? Because you're asking for RO.
Yeah, so the existing structure provides about 147, I believe, and we're asking for 227, which gets us closer to the 4 per 1,000 range, which is typical office parking in most jurisdictions.
Thank you. So I am not, you know, it will sound like, you know, we all America First credit union people here. I also bank with this with the credit union, and I go to this site quite a bit, and I know I'm very familiar to the area and the complexities. I mean, Denver Street, right across the street from the entrance to your parking lot, there is a parking lot, and it's a very shallow, you know, type of structure, and I see, you know, the entrances to buildings. I see, you know, it just unfortunately feels like an alley more than anything else to me. No, the alleys to, you know, Councilmember Romano here, who loves them, could not be fun and you know, attractive, and maybe there is a failure of many decades of this city to envision that long term. I am, you know, I don't want to take from those ideas. I think those are great ideas. And since we're rebuilding, maybe there is an opportunity. And you're talking about bringing hundreds of employees to the area, which potentially will create, you know, the need for something. But I definitely more interested at the most. Something that calls my attention is the building on 500 and 500, which, you know, it is a missed opportunity. We have a high traffic area right there. There's a lot of amenities and amenities that are missing too from that corner. So I am definitely interested on that. But in general, something that calls my attention is you're asking for 227 parking units, basically what, you know, the plan will call. How many of those are electric stalls or capable to plug in vehicles? Do you have a?
I believe we were proposing it's either 5 or 10%, whatever the city's requirements were. We have those on the main floor, which we would lose, and we'd have to kick those up to the second floor if we did that main floor.
I'll just jump in and say the city's requirement is 20%.
Okay. I think that is, you know, to me is very important that, you know, we're thinking about the future, and I'm hoping that you're thinking even ahead of that. You know, there is going to be more than those cars in the future coming in, and I think I will see that as a sign of you understanding the needs of our city. In general, I'm concerned about Denver Street because it is utilized in some way as a one-way street. I think it is actually a one-way street. And your construction might affect a business that is a well-established business in there, which I will like to have clear plans on how your construction, which is very much needed, is going to affect that business and the access to those neighbors that rely on that on Denver Street. So that to me are things that call my attention the most. But in general, I would love to see a clear plan on how you're going to use that two-story building on 500 and 500.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm actually still kind of confused about what we're even considering, because we're not considering a development agreement unless we negotiate that or that gets added in, right? And that's not part of the current request, or not what the Planning Commission gave us a recommendation on. We're just considering a rezone from RMU 45 to RO, both of which will be replaced in the upcoming zoning consolidation. And none of those scenarios, RMU 45, RO, MU5, or MU6, allow what they're trying to build.
That's correct.
If we step back even further, we're just trying to build a parking structure that's there.
I know, I understand. But what I'm saying is, I don't understand how the request accomplishes the intended goals, nor the zoning consolidation that we're going to consider. So I don't see the point in going to RO today, because that also doesn't allow you to build what you're trying to build, and it removes design guidelines, as Amanda was saying. So I'm struggling to understand why we would take action on this.
So one comment I would say is going to the RO zone, as was pointed out, would get us into the MU6 zone in the future, which gives us another 10 feet of height of availability for the parking structure, which would help us out if we ended up doing a ground floor activation in the parking structure, because those stalls that were taken away for that would then be able to be put on top of the parking structure. So that's where it would benefit, that it makes sense to do the RO now rather than just taking it out and waiting till the MU5 takes place, is it actually would allow us to potentially put that activation on the main floor and offset the parking with one more level, because it's an extra 10 feet of height.
Okay,
that's
so
allowed.
if rezoned and consolidated into MU6, this question is for Amanda, and they activate the Denver Street portion as required by MU6, is it then complying with everything, or are they still would they still need to ask for setback reductions?
I don't think they would need to ask for setback reductions. I think the reason it's confusing is because the mixed-use portion didn't come through until after the proposal was transmitted. So that wasn't part of the original conversation. The consolidation was in its beginning stages. So there's a lot of hypothetical designs on hypothetical zones.
Okay.
So we asked them, let's bring it for a briefing. Let's discuss what you want to do, see if there's a path forward. Planning's concerned, we understand Denver Street is not going to be your retail street. But I think there needs to be some consideration to maybe modify the original plan, which has been the original plan from the start, to meet design standards, which could be met, or maybe even reconfigure the building. There's a lot of options, but the main thing with the MU zones is that ground floor. And that could be office space, that could be, it's just really about wrapping that parking.
Right, and we're not saying the entirety of the ground floor of the parking structure. It's only isn't 25 feet or something in depth. So we're not saying the entirety of the ground floor structure, it's just the front of it, and it's not, you can still have your ingress and egress, and it doesn't have to be retail, it can be office, could be residential too, I would imagine, if, there are a lot of different things that could activate Denver Street, make it feel more pedestrian friendly, but still allow the parking. So I guess whether it goes into MU5 or MU6, to me is not super, isn't a really big consideration, but I wouldn't want to just say, okay, fine, it's Denver Street and we don't care about it, so don't activate it at all. I still think there are ways that it could be activated. So I would still push for that.
And just one more point. With the MU6, the drive-through would remain a non-conforming use. MU5 would allow them to move the drive-through, redesign the drive-through, do an addition on the AFCU building. If it was rezoned to MU6, though, that's not a land use that's proposed to be conditional. It would be prohibited. MU5, it would drive-throughs associated with a financial institution would be a conditional use on arterials. So just busier roads, which is 500.
Interesting.
So Councilmember Mano, so in addressing any type of concern also, this RO request has been out there for a while, so it's probably that the city has now caught up to MU5, MU6, and you're going, well, why are they here with RO? Well, it's been out there for a while we've been working with the city on this. So that's why you see the request remaining RO. And the idea of the development agreement is just to try and compensate for the missing pieces. Like, I still, the concern that staff has about design guidelines, we meet 90% of the criteria of materials and fenestration, except for the ground floor, and that's where I'm hearing you today, which is really good. And then, Councilperson Chavez, we heard you last time we had this conversation, and you mentioned about having about 20% of activation on Denver Street. That got passed to us, and our idea, because of Denver Street being kind of like an alley, that's why we moved this mixed-use concept down to 5th and 5th. We thought that would be more energizing of that. But we do hear everyone's comments about, hey, we can actually maybe help out Denver Street a little bit and help to get that, kind of going. So us and AFCU is listening today. I promise you, we're listening. Thank you.
Want to weigh in on that from the planning side?
On the design standards with the proposed MU zones, the building does not quite meet all of that 90%. The main would be obviously the ground floor use, which we're talking about, but because we're considering this one structure, it would not meet street-facing facade length and a few other things which can be modified through the design review process. And so this would still need to go to the Planning Commission, and the design review process allows for modifications for a better quality product. And so there would still need to be some give to make this work through the design review process to meet these standards or modify them.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Anyone else? Okay. Are we looking for a straw poll on this?
This was just a briefing to
Okay.
before
But you don't need
and then
anything from us today?
One more,
Oh, sorry, we got
one more final question, just on the MU5 versus MU6, because that's what MU6 would give you 227 spots. MU5 would give you
It's about 40 stalls, so about 180.
180, right? Okay. We have a need for parking. Go up to this tower up here and look out at this tower, and you will see a lot of asphalt. And more parking induces more driving. And I am not a big proponent of inducing more driving to an area that already has good public transportation there. So I'm concerned by, yes, we need more parking because we all need to have that freedom of a car. But I'm also in line of, if we build a big parking lot, it'll be filled because there's a parking spot for someone and it's free. And I'm not a big proponent of just building a spot for additional cars. And I am also a big proponent of having affordable housing and affordable living. And affordable living is that we get out of that car because that car is not going to produce anything there. I know that we have some people who would be working there, but also if they lived in the neighborhood, then they could actually walk to the place. So I'm concerned that we're inducing more driving because we think we need more parking. And that's just Dan Dugan's editorial comment. Thank you.
Thank you. With 220 stalls, that gives us about 25% we're planning on public transportation for 300 employees. So.
Just want to confirm for the council members if it's okay for this item to move ahead for the public hearing, or if there are things that you would like to know or answers you would like to get that would help know what zoning you would consider, and whether from planning there's any other information or ideas of what could be considered. It seems like there were a lot of questions, and I don't know if we move this on to a public hearing for your next meeting, if that helps set you up to be ready to take a vote, or if there's something that we need to gather and compile for you so that you know what the options are. And if there are development agreement components to it, that we can bring that back to negotiate as well.
Can you remind me the next step before design review? Because you're talking about a vote, and I'm hearing
Sorry,
from
the
staff.
next step for design review?
Right, I heard from you in terms of wanting to go through design review process properly.
Oh, yeah, so the property is rezoned, the structure either as proposed doesn't meet any of the zoning of the 4 districts. So it would either need to go through the plan development process with the planning commission. They had a petition that was tabled while this side of the zoning was worked through, or through design review, which is also through the planning commission. So they would need to go back through the planning commission. The design, obviously wouldn't come here. But I agree that having a direction forward would allow them to perhaps modify their plans to better meet the zoning, whatever zoning best fits this site, and then move forward.
I'll add my final comments, and I'd love to hear specifically from Councilmember Mono in helping me ideate this. But originally, my intent with this first proposal when AFCU came to present was recognizing, one, the proximity of, Councilmember Dugan mentioned this, the proximity of just existing parking. And in this existing zoning near TSA already, in proximity to grocery stores, multi-family complexes, all different types of residencies, and trying to activate Denver Street. It is not an alleyway by definition. It is a one-way street, and there used to be just ample housing all over this, and there is a future where it could be housing again. So my take would be for us to consider MU5 zoning. I think it would be interesting to consider housing and taking the steps to get there so that the applicant can come back with a better design. But I want to see us, I don't want to see us just extend another parking lot. Yes, I understand that there's an existing parking lot here, and there's banking institutions all along 4th South and 5th South, by the way. What we do need to think about is the neighborhoods we're creating and the activation in these spaces. And that's a commitment we each made to this neighborhood and to Central City, and we need to stand by that.
I don't think it's helpful for me to get closer to a public hearing because I'm not close to being okay, to being a yes yet. I see a pathway there, but I agree with you that if we have the chance, when we replace, we should be replacing with the caliber for what we're trying to build. And so that does include either eateries or a gym on the bottom floor or, residential, things like that. So I'm with you. I don't want to take this to a public hearing and to box ourselves into something that I don't feel comfortable yet with.
And Kelsey just stepped forward just to say the MU5 would be did nothing. That's what the zone would automatically go through.
I guess to the question of whether it should go to, I kind of think I don't, for my purposes, think that any additional time between now and a public hearing is going to be beneficial. If it's beneficial for other council members, great. I don't know that, I think at this point, I kind of feel like we just leave it, let it go through the process. I understand the desire for an additional 10 feet, but to me, all that does is add more parking when there already can be quite a bit added. And I agree with Councilmember Dugan with, I don't necessarily more parking because it's 4 per thousand. It gets us close to 4 per thousand, which yes, is kind of standard in other jurisdictions, but this is downtown. So I think, I don't think trying that, I understand that the market is going to do what the market's going to do, and you might, that's its own thing. We don't regulate the market, but I don't know that additional height for the sake of more parking is necessarily something that have a huge appetite for. But if there are these additional public benefits that like Councilmember Lopez Chavez has been asking about, like I want more, like if the negotiation because the applicant wants more height and we're able to get some things that we think the city wants as well, then I would be amenable to considering that. But I think that's would need to be a development agreement conversation, not just say, yes, have it, and then we hope you're going to do these things. So I think I'm not, unless there's something specific, I don't know that more time is helpful to me. And I think I would move towards voting no, so that it just stays in RMU 45, then goes to MU 5, and then if the additional height's necessary, we can consider that with what additional public benefits are going to be there.
Okay. And looking at the schedule, the set date would not be until March 4th, and then the hearing on March 25th. So if there is any information that council members would like to ask for, or that the applicants want to share, then that gives adequate time. There. Does that sound okay?
All right. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to oh. Okay, council members, the financial auditors are here, but they're not planning on speaking until 3:30. Wait, oh, they were. We're supposed to speak at 3:30. So we're gonna switch that, have them come up, and then we'll do the planning and zoning petition after that. Does that work? Come on up. I know, and which, as you may have noticed, we are a little behind. So let's just keep that in mind as we move through this and the next item.
How about we be really quick and not take 30 minutes?
Great.
Great. I believe we also have Paul Skeen online.
No.
He's not online?
No.
Okay. And we've got Suzanne Swenson, who is the Deputy Controller. She is online as well. This is Haley St. Michael from Eide Bailey and Mike Mickelson from Eide Bailey. Haley was the lead auditor for the entire ACFR, and Mike did the single audit findings. And then after they're completed, if we have enough time, I will walk through the risk assessment, which will take 2 minutes.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for having us. I am Haley St. Michael, as Mary Beth said. I'm going to go over the financial statement audit results. Just really quick, the first is our audit opinion letter, which is included in the ACFR, and this covers that we audited the governmental activities, the business type activities, the component units, each major fund, and the aggregate remaining information of the city. Our overlying opinion is an unmodified opinion, which is a clean opinion, what you're kind of striving for in an audit. So that means that we provide reasonable assurance that there is no material misstatement within the financial statements. We conduct our audit under generally accepted auditing standards as well as governmental auditing standards. We're required to be independent of the city, and we evaluate that every single year to make sure that our auditors are meeting that independence criteria. With an audit, one thing I wanted to point out is we always remain professionally skeptical and have professional judgment involved. That felt extra relevant this year as the city transitioned into Workday, their new ERP. That provided a bunch of new reporting and procedures this year, so it felt like we were looking at everything with fresh eyes and a new perspective this year, even though we have been doing the audit for many years. That's everything on the opinion. Like I said, it's a clean audit opinion, what you're really striving for. The next letter that I'm going to go through is called the AUC 260 letter. This is a letter that is addressed to governance, so to the city council and to management, and goes into a little bit more detail, things that aren't in the audit report but are important to point out to you. The first is that we do a risk-based audit. So the significant risks that we addressed are management override of controls and revenue recognition. Those are prevalent to all audits that we perform. those just say that management does have some control here, and we pay attention to the ability for them to misstate if they wanted within controls and revenue recognition. Another significant risk for us is improper capitalization. So we place a lot of focus into all of the capital expenditures and making things that are capitalized that should be. We also had an overlying risk just with the change in ERP. So like I said, that provided that fresh perspective this year. The next thing that I wanted to bring up is accounting estimates. So we like to cover items that have a lot of judgment involved in the way that they're accounted for. The first is the environmental remediation liability. This is just related to Salt Lake City's portion of the joint venture in the landfill. Again, we just bring this up because there are estimations in those future liabilities that are reported. The other one is pensions. This is calculated by Utah Retirement Systems, which is part of the state board, and they utilize actuaries to come up with net pension liabilities and assets, but we like to point out that it is a big estimate as well. The last portion that I'll go through are the uncorrected and corrected misstatements that we found during the audit. Corrected misstatements include a small adjustment to accrued compensation and compensation expense. We also had an adjustment related to investments as they needed to be further adjusted for fair value measurement, and then a small adjustment to housing receivables that was recorded in the wrong period. I think most of these did come up because of the change in Workday and being able to kind of see more information that we might not have seen in past years, or just see it in a different way. So that's where those entries came from. And there's one past adjustment that is related to an overstatement in revenue in fiscal year 24 that should have been recognized in 23. Again, this came out just with all the extra dates that we're able to see through the Workday reporting. That one was not corrected by management, and that's something that we're okay with in the audit because we consider it immaterial, so it wouldn't directly impact financial statement users. With those findings, we did post what's called a material weakness for the audit, and that's in relationship to reporting and the just account reconciliation. There were delays because of the conversion this year. It's almost expected because of such a big overtaking that happened. That's everything I have. There were additional letters that Michael go through, but.
Councilmember Young.
I love a good audit. So I think the thing that is part of my takeaway that you have emphasized here is that because of the adoption of Workday, we now have an additional degree of detail that we can use to be able to not just inform the audit side, but also like the internal controls and what the needs are. I also want to acknowledge the work that you've done related to building out that chart of accounts to be able to help us be more accountable in terms of funding year specific program and where those pieces are. To me, those are all steps in the right direction, and that it's allowing us additional insights to be able to then help inform next steps seems very appropriate. And I just want to provide my thanks to you for the fiscal responsibility that you show related to all the taxpayer dollars.
I want to say thank you, but I also want to thank my team of 5 that put this ACFR together, as well as Eide Bailly. They worked really well with us. This was a tough year. It's the hardest audit I have seen in my almost 30 years with the city. Moving to a new ERP system, we learned a ton about the way we want to move forward, have done some serious corrective actions, have done some process changes, but this was hard, really hard. So thank you for that.
Perfect. Yep, I was just going to transition to Mike to cover the next part.
Okay. Councilmember Young, that was a great segue. I don't have as much good news as Haley. I'm responsible for and the audit partner for the compliance audit, which includes 3 audit reports. The first one is the Government Auditing Standards Report, where we report any internal controls or non-compliance related to financial statement reporting. And so, as Haley already mentioned, there was a material weakness in internal control related to the journal entries that they found. We also had an additional finding disclosed in that report related to the schedule of expenditures of federal awards. And I think that was related to the workday as well. And as you provided that segue, we'll be in better shape next year. But there were a couple of programs that were left off the schedule that was provided to us. And when we receive that schedule, we have a risk-based approach that the uniform guidance requires us to go through to determine the major programs that we're going to audit. We don't audit 100% of the federal money. And when we finished our procedures on the CFA itself and did our risk-based approach, we ended up having to add another program to our audit testing after we found the 2 programs that were left off. And so that created a little bit of I won't say additional work because we would have had to do it anyway. We just started that 3rd program later than we would have if we'd had a correct CFA to begin with. So those are the 2 findings in the Government Auditing Standards Report. The next report is the State Compliance Report, and it has 2 more findings in it. We actually qualified the report in relation to cash management, but it's unmodified related to all the other compliance areas. So the first paragraph in that report lists the different compliance areas that we audited this year under state compliance. They have a chapter in the State Compliance Audit Guide for things that we can rotate through every 3 years. And so that's why we disclose what we audited this year. But cash management is one that's every 3 years, and this is the year it came up, unfortunately. With the struggle of the new ERP system, the cash management report that was due July 31st to the Money Management Council was a day late. Being a day late, I don't think would qualify our report, but that report was also incorrect. There were balances missing and incorrect balances on that report. And I know that management has looked at their procedures, the timing of that already, in providing the corrective action plan. And we didn't do any follow-up at December, but I'm going to assume December 31st was filed on time. Okay. Because that's due every 6 months. The other finding we had related to the preparation of information for this board and this committee, the council rather. You're supposed to receive quarterly, at a minimum, financial statements for your review. And during that implementation and that process, our inquiries revealed that you didn't receive that information as often as you were supposed to for your review. So I know that those struggles are behind you, and hopefully you're getting that information now. But it's said that an auditor is someone who comes in after the battle and bayonets the wounded. And in this case, I think that's probably pretty true, that we came in after the fact and found these things that were a struggle during the implementation. And compliance testing is a yes or no. And we had some no answers that we're required to report. And so this has gone to the state auditor, but we're also required to let you know of those things. So again, after the battle, we found those issues. The third report is the report on the federal money, the single audit report. The good news is there are no findings in that one. So I'll finish on that. I've disclosed all the findings that we had. Our audit of the federal money was clean. City's always done a good job and is very concerned with making sure that the controls are appropriate there. And so the controls work over federal money, and the compliance with how it's spent is always pretty clean too. So we didn't find anything there. Any questions on the compliance reporting?
Councilmember Dugan.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the brief, and thank you for your work. And Mary Beth, you kind of mentioned some serious corrective actions, and I'm assuming that's for all the different findings. And so those have already been written and implement or in the process of being implemented. Now, does the auditor review those corrective actions and agree with them, or how does that work? Because I know in some safety areas where the auditor has to agree with the.
When they come back next year, those areas they'll review again, and they will either complete that audit finding, or it could be an additional audit finding. It won't, but it could.
So in subsequent years, with this package, the single audit report does get filed with the federal government too. When we file that, we'll file the corrective action plan this year. Next year, they'll prepare for us at the beginning of the audit a summary of how they resolved everything. So we file that next year with that too. So there'll be a document that kind of closes that loop as well.
I appreciate it. And I do appreciate the transition to Workday, because I think it will make our life a lot easier and more transparent and easier to see things before they happen. So I appreciate that very much.
Yes. Councilmember Petro, then Councilmember Young. No? Oh, thank you.
My only question is, I lived with you last year and know what you were doing up until July 1st, while also facilitating a transfer to what you call a hard audit, which means it would have been impossible for 97% of the other people I know. So my only question for you, or comment for you, is to please let us know if you need support coming up in budget season in order to close some of these loopholes. I don't see anything here that demonstrates to me that there's a systemic indifference or fallibility. Rather, it was an overwhelming of operations and a kind of a confluence of too many stressors. So if you need something, I would like to make us available during budget season to make your job doable.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's all.
Can I go over the risk assessment?
Yes, go ahead.
So I'll end on really good news, because this one's very easy. So we have to submit a fraud risk assessment to the state of Utah. We have earned 375 points out of 395 points, which is a very low risk for any fraud, waste, or abuse. So I thought I would end on that, and we have submitted this to the state. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your patience in everything. I know that next year's audit will go a lot better.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's go back to agenda item number 4, which is a zoning map amendment at approximately 704 East, 900 South extension.
The council may recall in February of 2023, you adopted an ordinance rezoning the property. One of the requirements of the rezone is that the 4 dwelling units in the building be brought up to code. And if the work wasn't completed within 1 year, the ordinance would be void. Then last year in February, the council extended the time to complete this work by another year. And work has progressed. The administration reports that good progress has been made in bringing the units into compliance, and they are nearing completion before a final walkthrough. The applicant is requesting an additional 6 months to complete the work, and that there is also a resolution on tonight's agenda for the council to consider, which would extend that time. The current expiration date for the ordinance is February 21st, so that's why we have it on tonight.
Okay. Councilmember Young.
So just a question. So I look at a lot of these things through a slightly different lens, so appreciate correction where it's appropriate, which is like, as an educator, having a student ask for an extended deadline. And like the first time somebody asks for something, you're like, of course, there are things that come up, there are issues that we experience. The second time, you're like, oh, okay, like this is a bit more of a pattern that involves like a little more investigation. Like as it comes like more and more, it begs the question of like, so what is going on here? And I don't know if there's any additional context you can provide that would be helpful in terms of why it's necessary for the multiple extensions.
I think this is how I'm looking at it as planning and staff, is that he's really close. He has done the building permits, he's done the inspections, he's close. The only other way that we could do this is to do some kind of agreement with the city to make sure that he finishes it up, signs the DA, and moves on. I think at this point, he has gone through the process of changing, converting from the single family to the 4 units. So at this point, he's close. Like, we don't want to have him stop and then have to redo this whole process. But again, we could do it with an agreement with the city if that was, your what you decide.
Okay.
I think we just, and I also think that this is why we think the 6-month extension is fair instead of giving him a full year.
Okay, that's helpful. I guess, again, not knowing all of the extensive history, I do think that at some point there are no more extensions. And that is probably on where I'm sitting as we discuss this.
And I think that's where the 6-month is kind of a fair deal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other? All right. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Good job on that, everyone. We're at item number 5, enacting a temporary land use regulation for public school development standards.
Sorry about that. So this is a temporary land use regulation the council is being asked to consider later this evening. This would help the school district facilitate the construction of their 2 new high schools in Salt Lake City. City staff, planning staff worked with the city or the school employees to make sure that these proposed changes are acceptable and work for them. If adopted, these would last for 180 days. It addresses maximum building height, various setbacks, and allowed obstructions in required yards.
Is that 180 days to vest in a zoning or to execute?
To vest.
Okay.
So, yeah. So basically, how this would work is once this is in place, we'd work with the school district on their site plans. Well, we'd give some sort of zoning approval. They don't get building permits through us. And then that would essentially indicate that they are vested in that. And then we'd move forward. During those 100 days, we also would take this through a normal process to make it permanent as part of our code.
And I know that we value intergovernmental communications highly. So we've confirmed that 180 days is enough time that we should take this vote now, or are we in danger of the temporary land use not extending long enough for them to get?
I think we're pretty comfortable with what they've already provided us, and it sounds like they are too. So we'll.
Thank you.
I don't anticipate that being a problem.
Mr. Chair? Mine's more of a procedural or legal question. That when we've done temporary land TLURs before, it's been for what we understand to be temporary uses. So if we enact this and then when it comes, the actual rezone comes through and that's denied, then what happens?
So if they're vested within those 180 days, that stands. They would be vested.
And I was just going to chime in and say, but before the last several years, we actually used to do TLURs when we knew that we were going to change a zone and that change was coming, but we didn't want to. We wanted to communicate to specific developers, the change in this zone is coming, so we're doing a moratorium so that people couldn't invest in essentially what would have been an out-of-date zone. So there have been 2 paths for TLURs. That's all I was.
Okay. Got it.
Councilmember Young.
I'm excited for new high schools. I also want to reflect that I would hope as we move forward in this process, if there are additional needs related to these buildings that place them, at odds with the current ordinance, I would just open the door for those conversations to happen with council as well as with staff, because all of us are invested in the success of the students and the families here in Salt Lake. So whatever we can do to collaborate to make this happen, I am here for, and I would expect my council members to be the same. Thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Pui.
To this point, I'm excited that another is in front of us, and they understand that the process lays in this government entity, and that we're working together to the same goal. I hope that we all keep on working together to not undermine our authorities and to build a better community together. So exciting to move this forward.
All right, thank you so much. We are on agenda item number 6, the Economic Development Loan Fund proposal for Policy Kings Brewery, LLC.
All right, thanks, council members. This is an Economic Development Loan Fund, or EDLF loan, to Policy Kings. Policy Kings is a brewery that is moving to Salt Lake City from Cedar City, and the Loan Fund Committee recommends the council approve a $75,000 loan at an 8% interest rate over 7 years. This would be the second EDLF loan to Policy Kings. The last one was approved in August of last year. This would help create 15 new jobs in the next year and retain, I believe, 5 existing ones. It would also help pay for building renovations, leasehold improvements, machinery and equipment, furniture and fixtures, working capital, and contingencies. This item does not require a public hearing, and a vote is scheduled for tonight. And with that, I will now turn it over to Peter and Will.
Thank you, Austin. Thank you, council members, for having us this afternoon. As Austin mentioned, we're here to present to you the second Policy Kings loan. The reason we're requesting a second loan for Policy Kings is their location changed after closing on our first loan. So there are new costs associated with their new location, still in Central 9th, and we're very excited about their new location. Here to answer any questions that you may have about the loan. My colleague Will is here to take on those details.
Councilmember Dugan.
So thank you. So you said that the first loan is already closed?
Correct.
Okay, that's impressive because it's just been, you said, 1 year.
Not paid off, right? Closed as in we transferred funds, not that it's been paid down.
We closed, yeah.
Okay, so thank you.
Still outstanding.
Still outstanding, okay. Got you.
But yeah, they're up to date on all their payments and everything, right?
Yes, we closed the contractual portion of the loan and dispersed funds to them for the first loan.
And they've been good on their loans so far for that first one.
We've put the loan on deferment until we've resolved this issue. So loan payments will resume once both loans are secured and they're ready to move forward.
Okay.
Do we know how much of that building? I assume they're moving into the existing building, not demolishing and rebuilding. Is that accurate? It's the building on the corner of 9th South and West Temple, right? And are they taking the entirety of that building or just a portion?
No, the largest section, a significant portion, more than half.
Okay, thanks.
Is this the old Coca-Cola building?
Sorry?
Is it where? 9th South and West Temple?
Yes, on the corner.
Right by the freeway entrance.
79 West.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We are back on, well, not on time, but closer. Do we want to take just like a 5-minute break? 5-minute break? Okay, 5 minutes. Thank you. agenda item number 9, which is an informational update on the city's parental leave policy. We have Dave Buchanan, Chief Human Resources Officer. And some others. Yeah, if you'd please introduce yourselves.
So thank you for inviting us. So with me today is Lori Gayton, our benefits manager, and Christy Marcy, our program and policy manager.
Hi.
And just briefly, I think last year we had a request to take a look at the parental leave policy. And so we dove into it and came up with what we think is hopefully a really good option for our city employees. I think you have a copy of it. And so we're happy to actually answer questions about it today. If you want, I can give you a brief overview if that's helpful, or you want me to just quickly scan it? I can do that. So what we did is we took the parental leave policy as it was known, just the high level overview of it, and broke it up into 2 distinct parts. So we now have recovery leave, which is designated for a birthing parent, so anybody who actually gives birth. And then the second part is bonding leave. And that's probably more closely tied to what people recognize as parental leave, because that's available to everyone. We did a lot of research with both employees and department heads to see what would be a viable way to move forward. A lot of feedback led us to just moving into a 12-week program for those parents, for birthing parents, basically. We have far more who would fall into the bonding leave category. And for our 24/7 departments, that's a pretty substantial hit on them, trying to cover that. So we looked for an option to still make it new and different. And so what you've seen there is that the bonding leave portion has been changed to be intermittent. That's brand new and hasn't been done before, and can be taken at any point. It doesn't have to be at the birth of the child. So the traditional take leave, parental leave at the birth of a child, that's still the recovery piece, and that's continuous. But now the bonding portion is intermittent and can be taken up to a year from the birth, placement, et cetera, of that child in the home. So that's kind of the high-level overview, and we'll turn it over for questions.
And Mr. Chair, I just wanted to chime in just on process-wise, because this is a little coming out of our normal, but the reason that they're here talking about this is that it will be included in the upcoming annual budget to the extent that there's a budget impact. But it is administrative, so this is just a way to kind of thread that needle.
Great. Any other questions from the council? Yes, Councilmember Young.
I appreciate the opportunity to make it more flexible. I think about a lot of the families where they may be juggling 2 jobs and trying to figure out what it means for childcare and trying to extend that childcare as far as they can when it relates to having like a newborn and an infant. And so I think the additional flexibility makes sense, and without necessarily incurring significantly more costs. I also like to highlight that Salt Lake City has one of the best parental leave opportunities, especially when you compare it to other government entities. And I'm grateful that we take that family first stance as part of the policies and moving forward. I think the one thing that I would love to see in like a future consideration is, so sometimes like we preface a lot of those pieces on the birth of the child, and so it's like these are the opportunities that are available to you once you've had a child. We do also have individuals though who may not experience a pregnancy to full term, who also then have a lot of those same recovery needs. I know we have sick leave to be able to address those pieces, but just looking at, so what types of flexibilities are we offering to individuals who may be in that mourning period related to not necessarily seeing, the outcome that we all hope for with a healthy child at the end. So thank you.
Yeah, you bet. And we're actually looking at 2 different things right now. And Lori can probably talk more to the SDI piece, but in the event of a stillborn child, we're looking at an SDI component that would be enhanced to help somebody there. And then unfortunately, we've experienced a couple of events where we've had the birth of a child that then resulted in a sudden death. And so we're looking at some kind of a prolonged bereavement parental leave, which would be greater than our regular bereavement leave, and give parents in that situation an opportunity to grieve appropriately.
Thank you.
Councilmember Petro.
I appreciate this. Thank you, Mayor, for directing the administration to work on this. First of all, I had 3 C-sections and could never afford more than 4 weeks of recovery. Literally wasn't surgically cleared to drive and was already back at work. I love that we're protecting people who I can influence to not experience that, because it shouldn't be experienced. And I love that you did this with an eye toward financial stewardship and making sure that the functionality of the city can continue in each department. Can you explain the discrepancy between the 240 hours except for fire operational? How did those 2 numbers get arrived at?
It's going to be more of it's their scheduling, the way they schedule. I think they schedule in 48-hour shifts. And so in order for them to take the appropriate amount of time, they have to have more hours allocated.
All right.
So ultimately, it's the same, but for them, because they're scheduling, it has to be that way.
Councilmember Dugan.
I just want to appreciate all the work. This is awesome. And I love the way you broke it up into 2 sections. And I really appreciate all the diligence to this and also the thought process. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for bringing us the challenge.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's go to agenda item number 10, which is advice and consent for the Salt Lake City Attorney's Office. Come on down. I know. Yay. I hope he really has the votes. Super awkward.
How do you guys want to start?
Oh, well. Mark, thank you for being here. Just if you want to tell us a little bit about, I think we already know you, but if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe give a fun fact that we don't know, but just tell us what you hope to bring to this role.
Sure. First, I would like to give some thanks, if you don't mind. I'll be brief. I'd like to thank the mayor and her team for the appointment and opportunity to lead an amazing group of professionals in the attorney's office. It truly will be a great honor. Second, I'd also like to thank the mayor, her team, and all of you for the trust and grace shown to me while I've served in the acting role. Those were some pretty big shoes to fill, and thankfully you guys were pretty forgiving as I learned to step into those shoes. I also would like to briefly mention that this opportunity for me doesn't exist without those mentors and friends who took a chance on me in my legal career. Coming out of law school, Judge Davis with the Utah Court of Appeals, Patrick Anderson with the Salt Lake Legal Defender Association, my old law partner, Jason Hardin at Fabian and Clendenin, Margaret Plain, when she was the city attorney, hired me and brought me over, and Katie Lewis for elevating me to her deputy and supporting me through this time. Finally, the city attorney office team, well, not finally, there's a couple more. City attorney office team, it's such an amazing group of professionals, and it is always such a joy to work alongside all of them. And finally, I'd like to thank my family, who are listening online. They couldn't make it here today, but they've continued to support me. Everyone from my brother Joel, who always taught me that no matter where we come from, we belong in the room and at the table. From my mother, an immigrant who, for a good chunk of my early life, raised my brother and me on her own as a waitress, instilling within us the hard work. With hard work and education, it will open the doors to those rooms. To the rest of my extended family, who have always embraced, supported, and encouraged me. And finally, my wife Ashley and my children Olivia and Julian. They are my everything, and everything I do it for them. So sorry, maybe that gives you a little bit about who I am, but I did want to give some thanks. My background, I've been with the city for almost 11 years. Most of you know that. Last 5 years, I've served as Katie's deputy. For the previous 2.5 years before now, I was counsel to the Department of Public Utilities, and before that, I served as counsel to the police department. I feel like the diverse client mix has really exposed the workings of the city in all its facets, and I feel that that has given me a great skill set from which to jump into this role. Previous to that, I had worked for 7 years at Fabian Clendenin, practicing a mix of commercial and civil litigation as well as criminal defense work. Before that, I was a trial attorney for the Salt Lake Legal Defender Association, handling misdemeanors and felony trials in our justice court here locally in our 3rd District Court. And before that, I clerked for a year at the Utah Court of Appeals with Judge Davis. So I feel that my blend of experience provides me a unique skill set with which to step into the role.
Great. Okay.
I just need to know, may I, Chair?
Yes, go ahead.
What's your favorite ice cream?
My favorite ice cream?
Ice cream flavor, what is it?
I'm a pretty basic guy when it comes to ice cream. I do like a really well done chocolate chip vanilla ice cream.
Okay, this
Gotta
says
be
to
like the
me,
little
this
chips,
says
though.
to me he's elegant, concise, he's considerate of brevity and time. A reliable attorney needs these qualities. You have my support full-heartedly.
Thank you, council member.
I'd like to just already acknowledge gratitude. It was a little daunting in the middle of what we had just gone through and what we knew would be coming for us to shift such a pivotal position on the city team. And not only have you moved in with proficiency in your area, but your personality and your ability to balance a bunch of petulant electeds. And, you know, as we go through our professional and personal issues at this moment, just thank you for what you've already done. And there couldn't be a better choice at this moment.
Thank you for that.
Just want to also thank you. I know that this is not just it's a difficult task to be an attorney for an organization, but to be an attorney for a political organization where you're representing 2 branches of government is an extremely difficult and delicate task. And I'm just so appreciative that you were able to step into that. And that I know that you'll continue to carry us through seamlessly, and all of the team in the city attorney's office. So looking forward to being able to work with you more. We've known each other for a long time, but it'll be great to work together in this new role with you heading that office.
Likewise, thank you.
Go ahead, Councilmember Pui.
Thank you. I know that there is big shoes to fill, but I'm sure that you may make those shoes again bigger for the next one that comes after you. And you know, one of the amazing things about Kitty Lewis is how composed she was, even in the most stressful of situations. Situations that were I was about to pop out of this world many times over, and I usually handle stress very well, and sometimes I couldn't, and she was a source of level-mindedness that helped me see through my own frustrations and even my own emotions. And to that point, I would like to know, how do you heal yourself to be that person? Because I'm sure we all have the right to feel things and to have emotions, but I would like to know what you do to do that, to heal yourself and help us in the future. Maybe it's a way to recognize you in the future when those moments happen. I don't know if it is going for hikes or if it is massages or whatever it is, but I would love to know what do you do, to help yourself.
Yeah, thanks, council member. I would say that it's the day-to-day mundane tasks that sort of let me tune out and sort of decompress. So weirdly, one of my favorite nighttime rituals is just to like zone out doing dishes, listening to a music while I do it. And that gives me an excuse, sorry, Ashley, if you're listening now, to not have to deal with the kids. I've got to do the dishes. But it's things like that, right? You know, exercise when I get that freedom in the mornings before work, or just some of the daily ritual things, reading to my kids at night. Those things help me sort of decompress from everything that we are feeling here as a city. Things are heavy, and so I find it rewarding to retreat into the comfort of the daily ritual.
Send you some dirty dishes your way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark. Unlike other applicants where I say you need not be present to win, we actually do need you at the meeting tonight. So
Understood.
Because I am one of, I think, the applications that was for the human rights. I just was parking too, if that is, that 455.
yeah, that's coming up. No, you're fine. You're just. No, you're good. You're good. Okay. No, you're okay. Yeah, we'll get to you in just 1 second. You're welcome. So yeah, you do have to be there. So
Understood. I'll be there.
All right, great. See ya.
Thanks,
See you then.
everybody.
Okay, now we will move on to our board appointment for the Business Advisory Board. We have Alan Toalepai. Alan, did I get that right? Tolapai, you're good. Tolapai, okay. Sorry about that. There was even a pronunciation guide here, but I just really overdid it. So,
how are you?
how are you? So this is your opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in serving on our Business Advisory Board.
I'm interested because of Will. So that I just want to lay that out. The Business Advisory Board was because of my connection with the Salt Lake Economic Development Department. As far as background, I come from being an accordionist to a pianist to music at BYU, and now I'm in business. So again, it had nothing to do with my growing up. Served a 2-year mission in Panama, so I speak fluent Spanish as a Samoan. I'm a native Samoan speaker, born and raised in California. So the reason I got into business was I now do hot chocolate from Samoa. I manufacture cacao beans from Samoa. And so it's done here in Utah, packaged, sold online, e-commerce, and our Polynesian stores, restaurants, catering companies. And because I worked in hospitality for 25 years, that's my goal, is to put my hot chocolate next to your coffee in the rooms. So in 2023, I looked around at the chambers of commerce I was involved with and didn't see any Pacific Islanders. And so that was where it led me to forming the Utah Pacific Islander Chamber. So I am the president and founder of UPIC. Formed in 2023 with 25 members. We are now at 300. And so we have businesses that are located here in Salt Lake. And it's funny because prior to forming that, I was also the founder of the Polynesian Pickleball Club during the COVID. And that's actually how I came across Mayor Mendenhall, was at a pickleball tournament up here in the avenues. And I've been heavily involved in that to the point where now we're taking professionals from the states that are Pacific Islanders to compete in the islands. So again, growing from a little vision to now to where we are. So my involvement with chambers is not just with our ethnic communities, but also understanding who's been in business for 100+ years, Salt Lake Chamber. So obviously I go to them, I go to Chamber West, and I'm like, who's representing me at your table? And so when they can't answer that, that's me. So that's where I'm at today with this opportunity to be on the business advisory, and I've met some of those involved, and I'm excited for the opportunity. And so I hope you see that excitement and passion as well.
Any questions? All right. Well, so
Chair,
Alan. Oh,
can we
yes.
sit around and talk Panama? My grandma immigrated here from there.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
But from knowing you in the community, I'm really excited. Thank you for giving your time.
Love it. Thank you.
So you are going to be placed on, your name will be placed on the agenda on our consent agenda tonight. So you don't need to be there at the formal meeting if you if you have other places to be, but you're more than welcome to join us tonight as well.
And that's
at 7 o'clock right across the
good.
hall.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, but don't feel obligated. All right. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Up next, we have Shanae Holler. All right. Come on. Have a seat. So, Shanae, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you can bring to the Human Rights Commission.
Okay, my name's Shanae Haller, and I am a founder and executive director of Justice by Objectives. And so what we do is empower individuals that have been justice involved. So a lot of the individuals we're help navigating, employment opportunities, housing resources, and we're just trying to also educate our communities on how we can better assist these individuals. Because of our recidivism rate being so high, we really need to focus and help empower this population. And so I really try to help advocate for that the community and those certain types of marginalized populations. And I've also worked in like the salon industry, done different businesses, jewelry business as well, but different components like that.
Okay, great.
No, thank you for for your charity and volunteering your skill set, but just looking up the organization, I think this is what we talk about daily, is how do we provide support for our community members, especially those that are those higher need clients. And so I'm really excited to have you serving, so thank you, and specifically thank you for helping navigate those complex issues within our criminal.
Yeah, no, it's been hard. It's a hard one to navigate, but we just have been incorporating and like putting a lot of resources together so that we can educate, employers and employees. So, because that's where we're seeing the biggest need is the lack of employment opportunities. But there's a lot of resources that aren't really being utilized that I think a lot of employers would be happy to hear about too, just to help these individuals and help them navigate. So, yeah.
Well, back in 2009, I was appointed to the Human Rights Commission, and that began my work and involvement at City Hall. So I have a special place in my heart for the Human Rights Commission, and just a warning that, be careful. You could find yourself hooked.
Like hooked after that.
Yes.
No, that's really awesome. I just look forward to it. I just want to help our communities in any sort of way that I can, and we can. So.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So you heard the speech that I gave. You're welcome to join us tonight at our formal meeting, but you don't need to. You're not required to be there.
Perfect. 7 o'clock, correct?
Yep.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you so much.
Okay, we are on legislative follow-up briefing. Yay. We made it through another day.
Good evening. It's good to be with you in person tonight. I will jump in unless you guys have any specific questions for me. No? Great. First, I wanted to just raise with you that on Friday evening, the governor signed HB 267 Public Sector Labor Union Amendments, which means that the first sub of that bill would eliminate the ability to do collective bargaining. So that's what passed, and that was what was signed by the governor. So as we start unraveling the session in March, we'll need to be thinking through how that impacts our employees. Almost, I believe 60% of our employees are union represented. So there'll be a lot of work to be done in understanding that bill with HR and police department and other entities within the city. So just flagging that for you guys. I know that was a really big priority for the city. Any questions on the union bill? No, okay. HB 465, Law Enforcement Agency Amendments, Representative Snyder's bill. I briefed you on this last week. I just wanted to provide a little bit more of an update. So we're continuing to work this bill with our partners. And as I mentioned last week, we are grateful for Representative Snyder to work with us on some amendments, but the bill is we're still in an opposed position to this bill. And what this bill does is I kind of lump it into two different categories. The first category is that it provides punitive language around the city of the first class that receives Tier 1 mitigation funding. So Salt Lake, St. George, Sandy, and West Valley are required to enter into an agreement with the Department of Public Safety, or DPS, by July 1st. If we don't enter into that agreement by July 1st, our mitigation funds would be withheld and would be provided to DPS. If we still don't enter into that agreement by October 1st, our B&C road funds would be withheld. And if we did enter into an agreement after October 1st, the DPS would notify the Department of Transportation, or UDOT, that those funds, that we are eligible again, but we may not receive those funds back if we lose them. The other part of this bill is that it would require a rapid response team, and that rapid response team could be deployed in any city across the state, so it's not specific to Salt Lake City, but that any city within the state could have this rapid response team deployed to address camping and large-scale drug use. So a lot of work happening around this legislation, and how it certainly has a profound impact on Salt Lake City, but it impacts many other cities within the state as well. Any questions on this one? No? Okay. The next bill I want to talk about is HB 77, which is the flag display amendments by Representative Lee. This bill initially started out prohibiting, or I should say, allowing only certain flags to be flown within schools within the state. And in committee last week, Representative Lee created a sub to this bill that would specifically impact political subdivisions as well. So what this bill says is that you can only fly certain flags. So the US flag, a city flag, a flag of a country, but we wouldn't be able to fly a flag, for example, for pride or transgender rights, or any sort of cultural type flags that are really important to the diversity here within Salt Lake City.
Right out here in the hallway, we have 3 flags from when we hosted the Olympics. Would those not be allowed? The Paralympic Games, would those also not be allowed?
I'm not sure specific. I actually went back and reread the bill again this afternoon based on understanding, we had this press event on Friday around the Olympics, and how could this bill impact that. It does allow for bills of other countries to be flown, but I think we need to specifically understand if that would prohibit the Olympic flag from being flown. So we were digging into that and doing more legal analysis on that one.
Can I ask the question regarding that bill?
Yeah.
If there is an internationally approved flag, let's say for the sake of this example, a flag that the country of Mexico considers a national flag, could we fly it?
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
The hypothetical is, if an international country has an approved flag, could we fly it if this bill passes as is?
an approved flag from another country?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, you can. Yep.
Let me give you a different hypothetical. Let's say that one of our teams here in Salt Lake City, Jazz or Utah Hockey Club, wins a big, I don't know, the big match. Yeah, the Stanley Cup.
The big match.
That's the silver one. So we couldn't fly their flag at City Hall. Is that right?
I would need to do a legal analysis on that. Sorry, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, but I'll have our attorneys look into both the Olympics and the sports team question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Bowie.
What is the definition of flying the flag? We're talking about putting it on a pole outside the building, or we having it, posted in our room, or hanging from a wall in my cubicle. What is the actual definition of
all of the above?
So we couldn't have it in the building.
Correct.
How is that? Yeah, but even if I had it sitting in my desk, that will be prohibited. I don't understand the legalities of this, but how will that prohibit me and my rights of expression, free expression on my own?
Yeah, that's a great question, Councilmember Pui. So I do know that our legislative affairs attorney has raised some constitutional concerns with the addition of political subdivisions to this legislation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a difference between a flag and a banner? And if so, are both of those comprehended by this legislation?
Yeah, it speaks to cloth or a depiction of cloth.
That could then be our clothing?
Could be our what?
Cloth? If it's described as cloth, could that be our clothing then?
Oh. I think it also talks about them being generally rectangular. So I think it depends on it depends on the article. So.
Any other questions on this one? I will look into the Olympic and sports question and get back to the council on those two specifics. The other issue I wanted to raise with you is SB 154, the legislative audit amendments, and its adjoining resolution SJR 4. This bill is Senator Brammer's. It was heard in committee this morning and passed out favorably. There's a lot of concerns around this bill. Specifically, it would strip attorney-client privilege during a legislative audit. So if the state were to audit the city or anybody for that matter, it would strip any attorney-client privilege documents. And there's a lot of concern around this bill because attorney-client privilege is really important for people, for elected officials and for others to be able to make informed decisions about how you make legislation within the city. And so make really big policy decisions. There's the Utah Bar Association spoke out this morning in opposition to this bill as it just kind of fundamentally erodes the principles of attorneys, because it doesn't just impact cities, it impacts attorneys broadly. So there's a lot of work being done on this bill as well, but wanted to flag this for you because this could have a pretty profound impact on Salt Lake City. Any questions on this one?
What are the attorneys on the Republican side think about this? In Cullimore, I can't imagine him being in favor of this, or are they just staying silent?
Well, the bill passed out of committee, so.
And it's being sponsored by an attorney.
Yeah, it is being sponsored by an attorney, so.
Will it remove the attorney-client privilege for the legislature, or it only applies to?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, Councilmember Pui. There was a bit of back and forth this morning between Senator Weiler and the representative from the Legislative Auditor's Office on that very question. So, for example, if there was an audit that included the state, and the state was essentially the other legal client, and then the state was participating in receiving attorney-client privilege documents, how would that work? And so I think there's a lot of nuance to this legislation that needs to be worked through, and there was some really great arguments raised this morning in committee. Any more on those ones? All right. I feel like I come here not with the greatest news for you each week, and so I'm sorry. The next two bills I have for you this evening are around homelessness. The first is HB 505. This is Homeless Services Amendment by Representative Ellison. And this bill does a couple of things. It streamlines the annual mitigation reporting requirements. It creates a county winter response plan that will help with the review of where winter response will go. It helps with stakeholders coordinating street outreach rather than that they shall. And then it also creates a statewide camping definition that assists with camp abatements on state-owned land. And so that provision will be really helpful for the city. Living in Sugar House, I know it's challenging when we have a camp that is on a state-owned property adjacent to a UDOT highway next to a city park, next to private property. So one of many examples that I know that we face here in the city. And so that will be a really great technical cleanup that will provide additional guidance there for the state to be able to assist in those camp abatements on state-owned facility, or at least partner with the cities on that. Any questions on that legislation? Okay. And then the last one I have for you this evening is HB 329, Homeless Services Amendments by Representative Clancy. This bill was in committee this morning as well and has seen multiple iterations, and we'll see some more, I'm sure. But kind of the main gist of this bill is it creates a shelter county advisory board. It prioritizes innovative strategies around unsheltered policy. It creates a reunification program within the homeless housing account. It allows for the Homeless Services Board to coordinate with the Department of Public Safety to determine municipal compliance in receiving mitigation funding. It makes changes to the winter response, specifically around the Utah Homeless Services Board determining needs. And then it creates the Know by Name program, which may potentially be removed. Again, there's lots of technical amendments happening. It has a zero tolerance policy for drugs in shelters and has a fiscal penalty for shelters if they don't comply with that. And then it also has a first-degree felony for anybody that's using or dispensing drugs within 300 feet of a shelter.
On the portion, is the penalty for using drugs in the shelter or for being inebriated or altered while being in a shelter?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think, if I remember correctly, and I looked at this bill earlier today, I think that it requires somebody entering the shelter to sign a statement. And I'm not sure the nuance on that, but I can look into that and get back to you.
I know in the Code Blue shelters in particular, that could be the difference between someone being able to survive the night or suffer the consequences of some pretty terrible actions.
Yeah, let me look into that and get that specific for you, specific detail. Any other questions on homelessness bills? Any other updates that you would like on the Capitol?
How many more days of this?
Not that we're counting, but we have 3 more weeks left. And most of the work has not happened yet. So it's going to be a busy 3 weeks for your legislative team and you guys.
Can I take a page out of Angela's book and just express gratitude? Like, it's hard to find a lot to be to show gratitude for right now. It feels like the battle is on every front. And you and our lobbying team have been so professional, so consistent, so strategic, so communicative. I know that I feel like I don't rise to this challenge every day, and having you all at a time where people's institutional trust is at an all-time low, I wish we could point to you all and restore faith, because the work you're doing is not just good on behalf of those of us who sit in elected seats. It literally protects our constituents in meaningful ways that aren't status updates, that aren't symbolic, that are real, that are protecting real people. So thank you.
Thank you for that. I appreciate those kind words.
Along those lines, is HB 521 on our radar that just came out today about benefits for transgender employees?
It is, yeah. I sifted that bill for the city this afternoon and sent that to HR and to the council and mayor and others for review. So yeah, that is on our radar. Thank you for flagging that for me.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry, Councilmember Dugan.
So thanks, Angela. There wasn't any mention today at the league board meeting, but are the energy bills just moving forward? Are they in being rewritten, amended, the different energy bills?
Yeah, thank you for that. And sorry I don't have my sidekick with me here this evening. My understanding is the energy bills are being heavily worked by the energy groups right now. And so I can provide a more detailed review of where those are at. But when I talked to Kate just before we came in, I know they were having conversations just this afternoon on the energy bill. So it seems like there's a lot of work being done in that space right now.
And is Utah Clean Energy part of that discussion, or do you know that kind of details as far as the advocacy?
Yeah, I'm not sure who the partners are at the table, and I think it probably depends on the bill.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
But I'm happy to get more information on that for you.
All right, please, thank you.
Hey.
Thank you so much for your time on the agenda this evening. You guys know how to get a hold of me if you have any questions.
Thank you. Okay, the food is here, but we'll just really quickly, any updates from the council vice chair?
No, not really. Well, I guess maybe. So I keep receiving questions from constituents on different platforms to ask me about what's happening with this at the federal level, what's happening with this at the local level in our state legislature. And I think it is important for us to remind people to get involved and to not only email or call our legislators or our own representatives here, but to talk widely with everybody at the Utah House and the Utah Senate, and to share their comments across the board. I think we need more of our voices, not only ours, but like the neighbors to reach out. So I encourage everybody to visit le.utah.gov to learn about the contact information for the legislators and reach out not only, again, to our own, within your own district, but beyond to other jurisdictions.
Thank you. I don't have any announcements. Council Executive Director.
Just one quick announcement, Mr. Chair. The Utah Association of Municipal Councils is an opportunity for the city council members from across municipalities in Utah to connect, share experiences, and bring insights back to their council. Meetings are held on the third Thursday of every other month, starting February 20th at Murray City Hall. We don't have a formal policy for who represents the city council on it because of the kind of odd timing. It usually is a council member who has availability, but it is a good opportunity to network with fellow council members across the Wasatch Front. So would a council member like to represent a council in those meetings, or you want to think about it and get back to me? The third Thursday of every other month, starting February 20th.
Jennifer, can you explain how this works compared to the COG?
It's less of a formally recognized organization than COG. COG is a regional planning organizing committee. This is more of a, I would classify it as more of like a networking opportunity. So a little bit, not quite as organized as like the Utah League of Cities and Towns, but kind of modeled after that. So no actions are official from this group, and that's why it meets every other month instead of every month.
Okay. Well, let me look at Taylor's in my schedule.
Okay.
Unless someone else wants to. Just curious.
Thank you.
So let me know.
All right, so we'll go ahead and adjourn our work session and reconvene at 7 o'clock for our formal meeting.